Welcome to Air Checks. Here is more of the Gene Shepard Marathon on WOR in New York City. From September 15, 1964, a remote broadcast from the Disney exhibit in the I.B.M. People Wall at the New York's World's Fair.
What a Nigerian native would think going through this jungle section here of Walt Disneyana. Well, it's pop art in a yard wide. We are now moving into another dark, dank cavern, making a big right-hand turn, and ahead I see an enormous ballet of slightly drunken penguins. I'm not sure it's Pepsi-Cola they've been drinking, but they are swinging, and it's all part of this peculiar, I guess the word really would be almost surrealistic or anthropomorphological world of Walt Disney. There is an enormous plastic dragon holding a golden umbrella over his head. The air is becoming icy cold now, and as we move into the Arctic section of the world of Walt Disney, we wave a fond farewell. Who knows where we will land next? Be careful of that Mexican volcano. It is about to erupt. And now I am standing in front of the IBM People Wall, under the shade of the stainless steel trees that, through the beneficence of IBM, provide a little shade out here in this great vast wilderness of machine, metal, and sun known as the New York 1964 World's Fair. This People Wall, by the way, fulfills a deep psychological urge that mankind has always been prone to, and that is the desire to return, if at all possible, to the prenatal state. The enormous IBM egg is resting above us. In just a few moments, this vast throng of people who have come from far and wide are about to be swallowed up by an egg, there providing a deep psychological sense of satisfaction, as IBM, through its vast technical resources, has finally made possible man's eventual return to his pre-beginning state. Now, in just a few moments, I believe the People Wall is about to ascend. It's a wild sight, let me tell you. It's as though you're looking at some great canvas painting with thousands of Grant Wood faces peering out at you. You can see the look of the solemn Baptist. You can see the look of the angry protester. You can see the look of the sullen man who gave up years ago to a defiant wife. You can see children hanging there. In short, you are looking at a cross-section of all of mankind about to be swallowed up by Great Mother IBM. Just outside of the pavilion here, the fountains are going full blast. The American flag is flying high, the sun is beaming down, and there is a peculiar air of fearful expectancy among the people here who are on the People Wall. Somehow the concept of a People Wall reminds me of China and the great 10,000-mile wall where millions of peasants gave up their blood to provide the sustenance of that great symbol of antiquity. We here in America are not to be outdone by the older civilizations, and we're moving forward. In just a few moments now, the People Wall will rise. The egg is ready. It is yawning above us. And in just a few moments, this great mass, this moiling throng of humanity will be swallowed up and become the veritable yolk in a great seed of praise to Americans' technical prowess and its superiority in the field of business machines. Let's see. Now, there goes an airplane on its way over to LaGuardia. There goes a helicopter overhead. And now the machinery, here we hear the sound of a bell now. This is very significant. The people are tensing now. The stainless steel trees are rustling quietly in the fall breeze. I don't know whether or not they've arranged for the foliage on the stainless steel trees here to change with the seasons, but I suspect that next year, after all the bugs are ironed out of the fair, that might probably be accomplished. The fountains are rising to a crescendo now. There is a note of restlessness now I detect among the people in the People Wall. It is as though they are being held from the egg itself. This is a period of tenseness, as many of you who go to analysts know. The business of attempting to go back to your origins is not easy. It's always attendant with all kinds of problems of one kind or another. I see high atop the people wall a delegation what appears to be a small Iowa town. Their box brownies are clicking furiously, and the sound of film being expended is one of the more comforting sounds out here at the World's Fair. I suspect that underneath it all, the Eastman Kodak people have a hand in many of the vistas. That's one thing that must be said about the fair. They have cleverly marked all around the fair what they call picture spots that have all been pre-composed so that all the proper things are shown in the pictures when you get home. There are no drunks, by the way, lying under benches in the picture spots here at the fair. I can hear now. Yes, here is what appears to a mechanical man.
It's my pleasure to welcome you all here today. Fair and here to our pavilion. You know, I always get a kick out of looking at the expressions on some of your faces when I drop through that.
This is a mechanical man who has been lowered from the shell of the egg, and he is now suspended in a strange mechanical contrivance that looks somewhat like a gas burner, hanging over the edge of the people wall.
Straight up there into the information machine.
This is the information machine that looks really, what it's called out here is the IBM egg. Nobody is listening to him, by the way, as they sit there. That's interesting to watch. As the pitchman tells them about it, they all sit and scratch and look. That's one good thing you got to say about people. They're not so easily, they're not as easily led as the great pitchmen of the world seem to think. They're just sitting there resting their bunions for a while and digesting their hot dogs, and they're planning on the pizza immediately following the show in the information egg here at the IBM Center. Here they go now. Now watch this. This is a great sight. I say don't go into the IBM show. Just stand and watch the people wall rise. It's fantastic. Here they go. Listen. Hear the sound? The oohs and the ahs as the people rise into the great yoke of Mother IBM. The breeze is blowing coolly now through the stainless steel foliage, and the people wall is slowly rising out of sight to display a gigantic American flag hanging symbolically over our electronically controlled fountains. Ave, Ave, and peace be with thee. Enjoy your ride into the great, great yoke of the universe. Goodbye, O people wall. We shall return to thee on the morrow. La-da-dia, la-da-da-da-dia. And now, as the gentle sound of the transcribed music emitting from the many-fold colored waters of the fountain of the planets, we are standing in the sunlight next to the Clairol exhibit, where thousands of short, fat ladies, girdles creaking, stand in line under the searing hot sun to try their hand at 6 vari-colored wigs. How will you look as a redhead, or a blonde, or a brunette, or a ravishing, dark-eyed, flashing girl of old Spain? See yourself in a new hair color, in a new hairdo. And above the Clairol exhibit, there is a garland of what appears to be stainless steel, tastefully painted irises, with pennants of a medieval hue floating high over them, and back silhouetted against it is a revolving symbol of America's simplest 5-cent candy, the Lifesaver. Oh, by the way, right next to the Clairol exhibit, I don't know whether it's done deliberately or not, is the Scott Paper exhibit. They have many products, but this is one of the more interesting sides of the fair, to watch these women standing in long lines here, and they have a big sign that says "No men allowed." Well, I don't know many men who would even care to come, although I'm sure that there are a few that have tried to crash the line. In fact, I know that some have actually gone through, but that's another story. It's the Clairol exhibit, and I'm curious. This thing that immediately occurs to me here is this is probably closer right here. This kind of feminine mystique and this gigantic feminine egotism that is shown here at the Clairol exhibit is probably more significant as an exhibit than anything else that I've seen yet at the fair as a commentary on our culture. That I don't see an exhibit that says, men, try yourself on a new toupee. How would you look with sideburns? Men, how would you look with a bristling set of George Bernard Shaw whiskers? No, this is a female world out here, and I suspect that an archaeologist looking at this exhibit, digging up this one 1,000 years from now, would realize immediately that he has uncovered an actual religious temple. And you can hear the music building up in the background now, and we're looking out over the lagoon and the fountain of the planets. The women continue to move in a long, solemn, totally mirthless line. This is a line that is a very serious line. Charlie is being called. Well, God knows where Charlie is, and actually only God cares. And so now, once again, we return to our surrealistic tour of this peculiar pop art exhibit known as the New York World's Fair. By the way, one thing you can see from this side, this ladies' side of the lagoon, which is the Clairol exhibit, you can see a direct shot through the Equitable Life Assurance Society of the United States demograph, or demograph, as I heard a guy from Iowa pronounce it the other day. It's an enormous scoreboard just to tell you how bad the population is getting in the United States. And that, coupled with the Clairol exhibit, gives you some idea of the effectiveness of the fertility rite that is undergone out here. And so we hope to God you find Charlie, honey. We are now moving on to another one of the areas of the fair.
From October 16, 1964, remembering Al Pearce as a poor salesman. Selling seeds is not an easy task. Why painters drink too much. Parts of the opening and closing themes have been deleted.
Things going out there in Western society, eh? How are things going out there tonight in that great void of darkness there? Huh? Is the little group still together, the old gang? Huh? Do you feel those little tentacles of understanding and love extending from your little pad to the little pad 17,000 yards to the left and 14 feet above? That little silent magnetic line of force, that magnetic line of transistorized electronic love. Yeah, would you like to find out that you're the only one listening? The only one. There's just me and you. And there's no group at all. Would you like to find that out? I got it. Hey, it can't be true. Right, Fred? There's others, right? Yes, how are things going in the group? Of course, we have an insensate desire to be part of a group. I remember one time Miss Shields talked us into selling seeds. And about 17 kids immediately raised their hands and said they were going to sell seeds. Well, I have a terrible, it began, I must have been 6 months old when I discovered I was the world's rottenest salesman. I am just not only not a good salesman, but I break out in a rash. When you come up, do you remember what was the name of that comic who used to come on, and he had the big thing about being a salesman, and there was the scene where he would come up, and you would hear him coming up to the door, and he would knock on the door. He would go like this: "There's nobody home. I hope. Nobody home. I hope." Well, now everyone. Now there was such a thing. Now this was a bit of true truth. I mean, if there's like true truth. Oh, by the way, that is not redundant. Not at all. Truth comes in many styles today, and there's the true truth, and then there's just truth. There's instant truth. There's dried truth for use when you go out in the desert or places where you're going to have to, carry it in a sack. There's the moist truth, which is sweetened, and then there's dietetic truth, which is locale. There's all kinds of truth. So the true truth is a little scary. But I remember this guy used to appear, and he'd say, "There's nobody home. I hope." and that's the kind of a salesman I automatically knew that I was. At the age of 6 months, I broke out in a terrible sweat. I didn't even know what the word meant. I didn't even know what it meant, but I knew that I was not it. Well, I was about in second grade, and the terrible desire to be in a group led me into one of the great traumatic experiences of my entire life. I'm serious. It really did. Because, the group does it. They just move. They'll do it. They'll do whatever it is, And Miss Shields came into the class one day, and she said, "We have a very special thing today, children, for those of you who would like to earn a little money for the Halloween party and for our big class party, and also would like to earn a little money towards buying a set of world books for the library. We're going to have a seed selling drive." Well, about 45 kids immediately put their hands up. They were, for the Morning Glory seeds. They were way ahead of their time, but they got their hands up there right away, And the next thing I knew, I am leaving the second grade classroom with a seed kit that included nasturtiums, Morning Glories, that included peonies. I was very big on peonies, hollyhocks. I was also very big on a miniature chrysanthemum, guaranteed to grow in many beautiful multifarious colors. Well, I left there with a kit. Now, the kit also included with it instructions on how to use the kit. It told how to approach a prospective customer, a prospect. The first thing it says, assume that everybody wants seeds. It is very wrong to assume that you have to convince people to want seeds. You must go up on the porch and know that people want seeds. It is only up to you to uncover the latent desire to own seeds. Now, that's all it is. They all want them. Well, I didn't know what to do. It was a terrible thing. I got home, with my kit, and I had all these things. They were 10 cents a package, I remember, and they came in these little envelopes and little things. And the first thing that happened, of course, is one of them leaked. I am not more than a half a block out of the school, and one of the peony things is leaking all over the place. On the bottom of my little kit had a little handle. He carried it in, and the seeds are bouncing around. I tried to stick them back in the envelope, so I was already 10 cents down. Just already bad merchandise. Well, I got home, and I put it on the dining room table. My mother was next door, and she came in, and she looked at that thing, and she said, "Oh, no." She knew I had... It was beginning to start the business of selling the tickets. Selling this, selling that, selling the chances on the big mop they're giving away down at school or on the Ford or whatever. "Oh, no." And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to sell seeds. Miss Shields says it's very easy." Well, that afternoon I began on my career, which has not yet ceased, I'd like to point out. Not yet has it ceased. I went next door to Mrs. Bruner, big old fat Mrs. Bruner, and Mr. Bruner had not worked for like 5 years. And when he did work, he drank it up immediately. About the only thing that Mrs. Bruner owned was a complete set of used clothespins. And I went up on the step, right away. I start right next door. I bang on the door. Mrs. Bruner comes out and says, "Yeah, Junior's not here." I said, Mrs. Bruner, would you like to buy some seeds? What? Would you like to buy some seeds? Seeds? What kind of seeds? I said, well, peony seeds. Well, Mrs. Bruner's backyard consisted of large pieces of tin. It consisted of old tires. It consisted of piles of wood and a couple of things that were dead. And you know, it was very funny. She said, well, seeds? What kind of? I said, peony seeds. I have peony. I have nasturtium. I have here morning glory. Look at these beautiful morning glories. She said, well, I'll think about it. You come back later. Well, now there's a nibble. So I turned around and I left. I went down the steps and I turned left, and I'm about 15 feet away, and I'm now knocking on Mrs. Van Hoos's house. Mrs. Van Hoos's husband ran away from her 37 years before. And Mr. Van Hoos was only a legend in the neighborhood the time Mr. Van Hoos was there. So Mrs. Van Hoos was a very angry lady. And you know, you don't think of little kids, you don't know about these things. Tennessee Williams was only a rumor. And so Mrs. Van Hoos, I knock on the door and I said, Mrs. Van Hoos? She said, what do you want? I'm a kid, you see. She never had a kid. What do you want? I said, I have seeds. I don't want no seeds. Bang. Well, now I know, Mrs. Van Hoos, I'm sorry. I understand. I know now what it's like when a kid comes around and sells dreams and flowers and nasturtiums and stuff. So I pulled down my ear flaps and I proceeded next door to the MDs. Well, I had to explain to you about the MDs. Now, that was another problem. The MDs had the only true juvenile delinquent in the house, in the whole block. This MD kid was fantastic. I'll tell you, you talk about precocious kids. Well, I think MD, at the age of about 4 or 5 months, was already making some of the more Freudian experiments of the neighborhood. And he was about 7 when already mothers of daughters were calling up. And there was talk of having to move the 5-year-old daughter to the country. Well, this is the kind of kid this guy was, you know. So I come up on the steps and I knock on the door. Mrs. Empty appears like the wrath of God. Mrs. Empty was used to people knocking on the door. And she says, Dick is not here, and he's not been here for over a month. He's visiting his grandmother in Indianapolis. Now, I don't care what your mother says. Tell her to come over herself. Oh, boy. So I turn around, and I go down the steps. Well, it is now, you know, it's getting a little, my little kit is getting heavy. I'm only in 2nd grade, you know, and my seeds are dripping out, and my nasturtiums are dripping behind me, and they're getting kind of sweaty from picking them up and showing them. And now I am at the next house. Now, the next house, I'd have to explain to you something about the Staffords. I haven't talked about the Staffords, but Mr. Stafford was a mailman, and they were very mysterious. People who do things like deliver mail, very mysterious man, and they lived in a green shingled house. The Staffords, among other things, belonged to a very peculiar church where they would gather at night in the basement and holler. Now, I don't know exactly what that was. My old man used to call them holy rollers. And they were very straight people. Mrs. Stafford wore her hair. She had it plaited, like with black stuff, and it pulled it right back. And there was a bun that was about the consistency of a brass doorknob. Well, Mrs. Stafford was a very, very righteous lady. And Mr. Stafford was I'll tell you how he looked. He looked like, I remembered him distinctly. He looked very much like Stan Laurel. If you can imagine Stan Laurel after a bad bout with, say, a virus. Much paler than Laurel even looked, which was pale. So he would go out and he would deliver his mail, and they would come back and they would read things together. I don't know what those things were. And once in a while, Mr. Stafford was a very embarrassing man in our neighborhood. Now that I think about it, he would stand in the street corner and give people little tracts once in a while. And it's very hard when your neighbor is giving you a tract, and he looks you right in the eye and says, "Have you prepared to meet your maker?" Well, you know, that's hard to say to Mr. Bruner. Well, you know, he prepared different ways. There's a lot of ways to prepare to meet your maker. And Mr. Bruner prepared by drinking a lot of corn liquor. He knew he was going to meet his maker, and he wanted to be ready for it. Now, there are other ways. We could go on. You want to hear about Mr. Anderson, how he prepared? Well, Mr. Anderson prepared a lot of ways. One of the ways Mr. Anderson prepared was by stopping at Flick's Tavern every night before he came home, and stopping then, on his way home, stopping his Pontiac on the L&N tracks. He was not only prepared to meet his maker, he was figuring any minute now that he'd better go and have the maker come and meet him. He was waiting. But they always stopped him. They would push his Pontiac off the track, and so Mr. Anderson never quite did meet his maker. I suspect he's still out there at it. And I know he's still at Flick's Tavern. I checked on that the last time I was home. Speaking of meeting your maker, this is WOR, AM and FM, New York, and particularly speaking of bad salesmen. I don't have any seeds to sell tonight, but we have the Volvo. And the copy says, have you ever kept a car for 11 years? Well, the Swedes do it. They make a compact called a Volvo, and it's driven an average of 11 years by those cheap Swedes before it's traded in. It's a fine motor car. And incidentally, no one noticed when the first Volvos were imported in '56, except Sharpies of car enthusiast types. But now the Volvo is one of the most respected of all automobiles, entirely. As a matter of fact, one of the most respected of all foreign cars in the country. In fact, I know a guy once who was run over by a Volvo, and, well, that's another story. He'd been hit by 3 Gogomobiles, and nothing happened. The Volvo has him still in Mercy Hospital. However, be that as it may, the Volvo is a superb motor car. And one of the grimmest nights that I ever spent driving in a gigantic snowstorm was in a Volvo. And it was the only car in the eastern seaboard region, as far as I know, that made it. It's a great car. It's a Volvo. And you can find them at Rambler Freeport, Inc., West Sunrise Highway in Freeport, L.I., right? Back to work. See how rotten salesman I am? Oh, I know about it. I was just terrible. You know, I'll tell you what happened finally with the thing. I get up to this. You want to hear what happened at the Stafford's house? I'll tell you exactly what happened to Stafford's house. They were warming up in the basement when I got there. They always warmed up immediately before supper. I don't know what they did. I don't think they had supper. I think they broke bread. It's a very different thing. And I'm knocking on the door there, and the door opens, and there is Mr. Stafford. Well, Mr. Stafford is he's a true track giver. You know, he's kind of a watery blue eyes. He has very thin, straight, combed back hair, and he wears cardigan sweaters, those kind of gray, baggy kinds. And, you know, and he wears a sort of a funny, bluish, checkered kind of socks and slacks that kind of hang, brown slacks. These guys mix brown slacks always with blue and gray cardigan sweaters. Well, there is Mr. Stafford, and I knock and say, Mr. Stafford? I said, oh, you're the young shepherd, aren't you? I said, yes. He said, what do you want? I said, well, it's very hard to talk to a track giver. I've always found that trouble, too. No, I can't. I find it difficult to talk to drunks and people who hand out tracts. Somehow I think there is a parallel. There's something that connects the two. And I said, well, Mr. Stafford, I have seeds. Miss Shields said that everybody likes seeds. Well, of course, he did. Now that I think about it, it's too bad I didn't have a line of mustard seeds. But he looked at me and he said, what kind of seeds do you have? He's a very Christian gentleman. I said, I have these seeds. I have nasturtiums. And by the way, the Staffords, maybe good does pay. They were the only one in the neighborhood that had a terraced lawn and a garden. And so he says, what kind do you have? I said, well, I have nasturtium seeds. I have morning glory seeds and peonies. Do you have any vegetable seeds? I have chrysanthemum, and I have button peonies, and do you have any tomato seeds? I only got flower seeds. We only have flower seeds. Well, I'm sorry. I get my flower seeds from the burpee people. Burpee people? The burpee people. When you get some vegetable seeds, come over. And that, he closed the door. Oh. The burpee people. I didn't even know up to this point the principle of competition. The burpee people. Somehow the burpee people are cutting me out. I never heard of this. Who are the burpee people? Any of you ever hear of the burpee people? Did you ever hear of the burpee people? Well, the burpee people undercut the entire second grade of Miss Shields that year just like a knife. Boom, like that. Boom, pow, just like that. Well, it's kind of dark, you know, and I by now I'm slowing up. I'm no longer wound up like with a spring. I'm going real slow. And I get down by the woods, and in the woods, the Bee Gees lived. And the Bee Gees were a large Germanic family. They all had very wide faces, and they had very wide-faced dogs. And yes, and they were named Fang and Claw and names like that. And they lived in the woods. They did. They lived in the woods. And Bee Gee, that's another story. We'll carry that one over for later. That's connected with the skull incident. But the Bee Gees are living in the woods. And the girls, they had about 9 of these gigantic blonde girls named Brunhilde. They really did. They had names like Brunhilde, Siegfried, and all just wild chicks. And so I knock on the door, and a large dirndl girl came. Says, "What do you want?" And I said, "The seeds. I have seeds." "We don't want no seeds." Boom. Pow, this big girl. And with that, I could hear, "Ooh, ooh." Fang is going to town in the back. Oop, oop. And down the stairs I go, and I turn right. And by now, it's supper time. Well, I got home, and it's a funny thing. I came home with my seeds trailing behind me. I was leaving a whole long line of little nasturtium seeds behind me. I could see them shining in the moonlight. And I come home, and I take my seeds, and I put them on the dining room table. My mother's doing nothing. She's out there stirring the red cabbage. And my kid brother's in the john. And, it's home. It's time for supper and stuff. And I'm fooling around. I'm very depressed, and I don't know. I'm failing the World Book people and everything. We want the World Book for our own classroom. Every room should have a World Book. And I hear I'm lousing up already. No World Book. We're going to have a rotten, lousy, terrible, terrible party at Halloween. There's not going to be any candy corn, nothing. There's not going to be any streamers. And then I begin to worry about the other kids. Obviously, maybe those other kids like Jack Robertson and Murrow Robertson are out there selling like mad. They're selling. I'm going to be failure. And already I'm in the living room and fooling around. And my mother's paying absolutely no attention. She knows I've been out with the seed root, whatever it is. And so finally the supper's ready. The old man comes out of the basement. He comes in, sits down. I'm sitting there. And my mother says, "How are the seeds? Did you sell any seeds?" I said, "No." Well, I did not realize, never did I realize until that very minute, what kind of a life my old man must have had. Oh boy, I'll tell you, that forever and ever and ever turned me away from the whole field of selling. I could never do it ever again. And I never realized until that moment what my father's life must have been like all of his life. Nothing to do with Willie Loman either, Always there was on the wall, I remember, of his office, there was this big thing called the sales chart. Well, as a kid, I thought it was great because they had red ribbons on it. And, and they had different guys' names like Zudak, Gertz, Shepard, And I used to think, I never thought that those lines were life and death to those poor clowns, and represented like 15 million hours of defeat. Defeat, oh, fantastic defeat. I says, and the old man says, "What are you doing, selling seeds?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, how'd you do?" I says, "Well, Mrs. Bruner's going to think it over." Mrs. Bruner's going to think, oh, boy, he knew the Bruners, the Bruners, Mrs. Bruner's going to think it over. Even at that hour already, we could hear Bruner starting to yell. He's falling up and down the basement stairs now. See, what he did was in the basement, he made stuff out of raisins in between true drunks when he could go out and buy stuff. I don't know how he did it, but he made it out of raisins and apricots, which they got from the Relief, by the way. So Bruner's yelling and falling up and down the steps, and Mrs. Bruner's thinking it over, whether to buy nasturtiums. And a kid, he believes it. So he says, "Oh, she's going to think it over." "Well, how many do you have?" And he says, "Gee, let's take a look at these." Well, it was the first, our family was definitely a non-garden family. So definitely, there are dog families and garden families. My family was also a non-dog family. As a matter of fact, I come from a long line of dog kickers, actually. So you can see how I arrived here, So oh yeah, you can't imagine Jack Parr kicking a dog, for crying out loud. Well, you can me, you know that. I mean, a king, I'll belt him right in the chops. Well, so my mother always used to have one line about dogs that always fits. She says they smell bad. Well, that's unmistakably true. We had enough trouble with Uncle Carl without bringing dogs in to add to the jazz, So you don't want to hear any more about this. Oh, yeah, well, I come from a very practical family. She says, "I'm tired of cleaning up after too many people around here. Why dogs?" We had this Uncle Carl. He'd do all kinds of things in the basement stuff. So, well, we had that too. We don't want to go on with that. But nevertheless, my old man says, well, what about the seeds? Let me look at the seeds. And so I go out in the dining room and I get the seeds off the dining room table. Which, by the way, I hate to bring one thing into the other, but the dining room table was also one of my great defeats. We had gotten from somewhere, inherited, I think, a lace dining room tablecloth. A big dining room table, or lace, They had dining room tables then, big things with lace on them, see? And there was always a bowl in the middle with used bananas and stuff there, So that was it. That was a big thing. Well, one fantastic day, which I do not even want to think about at this point, one enormous day, I spilled a half a bottle of India ink right on our lace tablecloth. Well, I'll tell you what we did. We had the only off-center bowl of wax fruit in the neighborhood. We had a bowl of fruit that would sit about 3.5 feet to the left of center, sort of over there. It covered up this giant blot. Well, I go out there to get the seeds, and I bring them back in. And my mother says, these are very interesting. And the nasturtium seeds are falling out of the bottom. She's looking at, we're all sitting around there with the red cabbage. She says, these. You mean you can grow these flowers? And on the cover, of course, of these gigantic morning glories that were about 3 feet across, 17 different colors, and there would be like the nasturtiums. Oh, you couldn't believe the hollyhocks. Oh, the hollyhocks were 30 feet tall. That kind of thing. Giant, wild, red, purple, green, blue, white. So she says, that's very interesting. How much are these? And I said, well, they're 10 cents a piece. I had about 10 packages. I don't know how many, maybe 10 or 12 packages. The total investment was roughly $1.25 in my entire stock, and that was at retail. I don't know what Miss Shields paid for them. So she looks at the very interesting, and my old man says, well, how do you sell seeds? What do you tell them? I mean, I was very definitely a non-seed neighborhood. I said, well, the thing here, and I took out the little folder. It says, everybody wants seeds. He says, everybody wants seeds? Well, my old man happened to work at believe it or not, he worked for a milk company. And you would believe that everybody wants milk, wouldn't you? Have you ever tried to go out door to door to sell people milk? Boy, more guys prefer beer. You'd be surprised. There are more non-milk drinkers who, if told that everybody wants milk, would bust a gusset laughing, So the old man says, that's a funny thing. He says, that's what they tell us at the office. Everybody wants milk. Well, visions of Mr. Bruner are dancing in his mind, trying to sell Bruner a half a quart of milk. The ridiculous scene. So I says, well, everybody wants seeds. He said, I'll tell you what. He said, go get my wallet. Well, the wallet was in the kitchen, up on top of the refrigerator. He says, go get it. It's back there. So I get it. And he says, here, how many are there? I says, there's 10, 12. And he gives me $1.25. He says, is this enough now? He says, here now. And he takes the seeds, and I'll tell you exact home scene. He takes the seeds. He's got a handful of packages now, and he takes them across, throws them like cards across to my mother and says, here, you're always hollering about flowers. You always want flowers. You always say I never give you flowers. Here's some flowers. Make your own. Here. Well, I'll tell you, to carry it even further, if you want to hear the wild end, I couldn't, I'd sold all my seeds. Somehow I felt like a real crook, a real cheat. But I learned a lot about salesmanship, or the fact that I never could be one. And I had the $1.25, and the next day I go into Miss Shields, and there it is. I plunk it down. Of course, Jack Robertson plunks it down. Merle Robertson plunks it down. Joss Way comes in, and he's only sold 3 packages. He had a cheapy old man. And everybody's plunking it down. Well, of course, it was obvious that everybody's family bought the seeds, now that I think about it now. But I pretended, I went up and around. I went up and down. I went down by Kennedy, I was up and down by Cleveland. They were all asking each other where they went, the Legion Hall, one kid. Of course, nobody would admit that Uncle Fred bought them all. So my old man bought all the seeds. But I will tell you the denouement of it, and then this is probably. I came from a family that was totally urban. We have never ever grown anything ever in our entire existence. We lived nearby where there were things like this. Well, about 4 months later, who do you think is out back of the garage? You guessed it. my mother is out back of the garage, and she's digging. Our backyard was made entirely of ashes. and my mother is out there digging a hole in the ashes. She is clearing the ashes out from behind the garage, and of course she's finding old tire irons and stuff, and she's clearing the ashes out. And she has made a little plot that's about as wide as the garage. It's about 6 or 7 feet wide and about 4 feet in the other way. And she has dug this out, and she has planted our little things, all of the seeds. She planted the whole shebang back there in this little plot, and she made a little fence out of string. Well, incredibly enough, this stuff grew. We had like 3-inch hollyhocks, which are very difficult. The new dwarf hollyhocks my mother created. She created, by the one thing she created, I'll tell you what she created out of those original seeds. She created the morning glory scourge. The morning glories took hold like they were out of their skulls. They completely covered the whole neighborhood. They killed what little lawns there were. They killed 7 trees. They went, their vines. Some of those morning glory vines went over 4 miles into the next county. They went over to Cook County, as a matter of fact. And of course, there was a county law about bringing seeds across the county, all kinds of things. But she had a tremendous success with the morning glory. Well, my mother got the eye. She got the look in the eye. And since that day, because of my rotten seeds, my mother every year is out in the soil of Indiana trying impossibly to grow orchids. She buys orchid seeds, of course they never grow, She's always trying to buy, she's trying to buy rare tropical plants. She's trying to buy all kinds of things which never ever make it. She has the greatest supply, the greatest collection of crummy-looking, shaggy, rotten, smelly irises. Irises are very beloved by dogs and cats for whatever dogs and cats do in irises. Well, my mother she has the most fecund collection of irises that have been grown over a 15. But the point being here that even to this day, that whole scene goes on and on and on. The chain reaction is incredible of every ridiculous movement that we make in our lives. The irises are out there growing, and every time now when I pass a salesman in the hall, Ed, without fail, every time now, I have that funny feeling down in the pit of my stomach. Yeah, and here's what's worse. I have the feeling, somehow, I can't explain it, that somebody is going to sentence me to go back to do it again. Somehow it's still out there, those doors, there's nobody home. I hope. Nobody home. Nobody home. I hope. Oh, my God. He always sings raggedy music to his cattle as he swings back and forward in his saddle on a horse, pretty good horse, syncopated. Oh, cut it out. I can't even sing. It's so sad. You can't imagine Willie Loman standing over the piano belting it out, can you? Belting it out. All right, dang. Oh, no, fellas. Ragtime cowboy, talk about your cowboy, Joe. Oh, no, fellas, stop. You want me to sing it? You really want me to sing? But the sound goes on and on and on. And by the way, kids, that lecture will be filed under real education, as opposed to the education that you're going to get. The stuff that you're going to read. You won't read about that, I'm sure. And I suppose this is one of the reasons why everybody secretly empathizes, identifies with Willie Loman. In a crazy way, because hardly anybody I know who sells anything really knows anything about what he sells. And furthermore, hardly anybody I know who sells anything really cares about the thing that he sells about. That he sells. It's just the thing that he sells. Selling itself is kind of a ritual. It doesn't have anything to do with what you're selling nor who buys it. And so about the only way that a guy can sell is on his own being, himself, the way he is, how he comes on, the scene that he makes. Well, when you don't sell, they're not they're not rejecting the nasturtiums. They're rejecting you, you know. They're rejecting your great big fat pearly teeth and your beautiful rotten pock-marked soul. They're rejecting it all. And so Willie was aware of that. You know, Willie would come dragging back, and even though he always figured that the next week he would get the order, that they would love him finally. and he always knew underneath it all that he wasn't worth loving, which is even worse. Which is perhaps the greatest, not really the greatest tragedy, the greatest reality. But it is no wonder that salesmen drink heavily. I would be willing to bet that among all the various professions that are pursued, I would be willing to bet that the salesman probably drinks more than any of the larger ones. Of course, there are a few little groups that drink because of physical problems. Have you ever heard the myth, Ed? It's not a myth, I'll tell you. Have you ever heard the story about painters drinking? I mean, house painters. And it's always reputedly because of the lead in the paint, and it makes them very thirsty or something. It does something to their metabolism or something, and they have an insatiable desire to drink themselves out of their skull. Well, it's terrible to have to realize, to have to admit such a thing. But twice when I was a kid, I worked for house painters. And both times, these house painters, they never took lunches. I mean, like people take lunches, like a sandwich. These guys would have thermos jugs full of gin. And more than once, I never forget one time a house painter, I'm at one end of a scaffold and the house painter's at the other. I'm 14 years old and I'm going out with his daughter. And this house painter's at the other end yelling and hollering, and he had this great big paint brush with white paint, and he's progressively getting bagged. And we were working one of these jobs where you work at night. You see, they don't do this in the daytime. It's only at night and he always looked for jobs where he could work at night so he could get bagged, and so that I didn't know anything about this. It's terrible to find to be going to work somehow, to find out things about the father of the girl you're going with. Somehow you usually invest this guy with great supernatural powers. I mean, he created this beautiful thing, and you never think of the girl you're going with coming home to a father who's yelling and hollering and breaking the windows and kicking the lamps over, So, you think this girl doesn't know about any of that stuff. Have you ever had the feeling that girls don't know those four-letter words, Ed? Oh boy! And you run through the subways very fast so they don't notice what's written all over the Gallo wine ad and all that, I'll never forget one time. I'll tell you one time. I'm. You want to hear the scene? You want to go all the way? Well, I'm with this girl, and I hardly knew her, but she was a very impressive girl. And I was trying to impress her. I had on my new Tom McAn shoes and everything, and I was really going all the way. I was about 17, and we're in this bus. And being a very, very correct guy at that time, I says, well, you sit inside, and I'll sit on the outside here to protect you from candy wrappers and stuff, and we're going on this big date. So she sits inside, and somebody had written the most fantastic thing you ever saw in your life on the window. And I kept trying to draw her attention to me, like I'd wiggle my ears, or I'd show her how I could spit through my eyes, or all kinds of stuff, I'm trying to keep her from looking out the window. Said, well, it's a very bad neighborhood out here. There's nothing here. Look across. I kept pointing across the aisle, so she would keep looking out of the other window. Well, of course, it finally happened. She sits there for about 10 minutes looking out at the scenery, and of course, she had to look right through the sign. It was a very funny feeling. For the rest of that evening, I felt somehow I had debauched her. I had taken her into this bus. But this whole business of the secret world, the secret fears, and the secret fears of the Willie Lomans. Well, I remember one night I'm standing on one end of the scaffold. We had one of these scaffolds, that you pull up with the chain and stuff. So he pulls up the scaffold, and I'm at one end, and I'm a kid, and I've got this 2-week job with him, and we both had these great big wide brushes, and we're painting the interior of this place. It was a great big barn-like thing, like a big gym or something, and he had this white paint We had put a very thin coat on about 3 days before, and now we're putting the final coat on this thing. And he'd been okay for about 3 days. You know, it's funny how these guys, they've been okay. And so I'm over there painting, and I don't know what's going on. All I know is that the guy down at the other end, he keeps opening his lunch bucket. Well, the next thing I knew, I'm getting paint on the back of my head. He's going like that with it, saying I'm getting it on the back. Well, you can't say, hey, quit slopping the paint. This guy, this guy's the painter. And he was always yelling at me up to this point to quit slopping the paint. This is how much that paint costs, kid? I'm slopping it on the floor, so I'm very careful. So now I'm getting it on the ear all the time. Like that, he goes... He slops it across on the floor, everything. Well, I look over there, and he is standing on one foot. Well, it's very difficult, to contemplate a painter who is about 40 feet above the ground, standing on one foot with his other foot sort of leaning halfway on the wall and pushing the scaffold back and forth like a swing, And every time he goes back, he slops it. He goes like that. He is bagged to the teeth. Well... You don't want to admit this, You don't want to admit that the guy you're working for, who is your girl's father, is bagged. You just sort of pretend like that's the way he paints at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday. Just like that. He's going like that. Well, he's getting worse and worse. And about 4 in the morning, he yells, "Hey, you want a drink? Let's knock off." He thought he was still working with his old friend Emil, and it's just me, this 14-year-old kid. Hey, let's have a drink, for God's sake. And he opens the thing and passes me this warm, great big, it was about a 9-quart thermos jug. Yeah, I'll have a drink. And I take the thing, I hold it in my hands, and oh boy, I'm telling you, this was either solid gin. I can't tell at this point. Kid, I don't know anything. I'm strictly in my yoo-hoo phase, and I don't know whether it was gin. It smelled like the stuff my old man put in the Graham Page. It did. It really did. It's such a fantastic blast came out. It smelled exactly like our radiator in the car at about 3 in the morning, Ed, when it's boiling over. Well, that's the way this smelled, and he is slugging this stuff down. I don't know whether it's Xerox or Prestone or what. He's knocking it down, and I hold this thing, and I says, well, and I sort of hold it up, and it's just a tremendous fumes coming out. And with that, he says, "Oh, you're just a kid. You shouldn't drink. You're a kid." He suddenly realizes he's got a kid, so he grabs this thing, and he says, "You shouldn't drink on the job. You never should drink on the job, kid." And he puts the cork back in the rubber thing, and he's trying to screw the aluminum cap on, and he can't get it on, and he's sort of flubbing around with the cap. Right, I shouldn't drink on a job. It's a bad thing for a kid to drink on a job. I don't know what's happening to the kids today. They're drinking all the time. The kids are rotten. Nobody ever drunk on a job when I was a kid. You're a rotten kid. Wow. And he starts to yell at me that if I ever came over, if you ever come over to see Betty again, I'll kick you right down the stairs. A rotten drinking kid, for crying out loud. A rotten drinking kid. And he's putting this thing back, and I'm down there with my paintbrush. What do you mean rotten drinking? I never drink in my life. And I don't drink at all. You lying kid. I see you sitting there with a jug of gin in your hand, you bum. Get out of here. I don't want no rotten drinking kid around. And he kicked me right off the scaffold. You rotten drinking kid, get out of here. And he's slapping the paint. I can do this job myself, you bum. I go out the front door. And I don't drink, What do you mean I don't even? You lying bum. Look, kid, I don't care if you drink. It's your own liver. I don't care, you bum. But I don't want you to lie. You don't lie, kid. He slops some more paint. He goes, put it up like that with a paintbrush. And out into the cold I go at 4 o'clock in the morning. Oh, my. You don't want to hear any more of this, do you? Oh, gee. Of course, education comes in many forms, and now I don't know. I'm not insulting painters. If any of you painters out there who don't drink, I know you don't. But actually, every painter I ever knew did, and it's just one of those things. You don't want to have to admit it. Now, on the other hand, gee, it's terrible. I hesitate to tell you what plumbers do. That's another crew in time. Bricklayers? Oh, boy. That's everybody's got his own hang-up. And every hang-up is a little bit different from the one just before it. And you know, I don't know. But as far as that goes, kid, just what you do, you see, take a look at your old man once, a real close look, see, when he doesn't know you're looking at him. Take a real close look at your old man and try to figure out how he got like that. Just once. You try to figure out, you see, the first thing you got to realize.
From November 7, 1964, the program originates from the Limelight, New York City. Shepard tells about his last 2 weeks touring with the Beatles in Scotland. A meeting with a countess. A visit to the Whoopee Club. Ping Pong in New York City, an army story.
You fathead! You'd be surprised what it was. Oh, I'm on the air. It's all right. So don't you see these little girls there? It's all part of the window dressing. We won't be on for another half hour. Ted Malley is still giving his weather. So just be calm out there. You know, since we are here now at the Limelight, are we all at the Limelight, gang? Let's hear it. Yay! What a hole! Yay! And it's in the heart of sizzling, live, dynamic, honest, clear, clean-cut Greenwich Village, where the search for truth goes on endlessly. Right, gang? Yeah. We're searching for the truth tonight, eh? Yeah, I can hear that. You notice how they chickened out when you said the truth? There's a little fear. You know, have you ever had the feeling that you take the average person, especially men, I don't know about women, but I can tell you, the average man, he's walking down Fifth Avenue or he's walking down the main street in Trenton, just walking along, you know. You put your hand on his shoulder and say, okay, buddy, it's all over. He'd say, all right. I'm serious. I'm sure that the average guy always waits for the heavy hand on his shoulder. And when you use the word truth, he always thinks it's in connection with somebody else's rottenness. But you look a guy right in the eye and say, the truth is going to come out one day. And then what? Well, I'm going to tell you what. For the past 2 weeks, I have been living with the Beatles, or as they would call it, the Beatles. And I've been in Dundee, Scotland. I've been in Edinburgh. I've been in London where they work, Leeds, Liverpool. I've been in all these various cities on a whole series of one-night stands with the Beatles, living with them, living in their room with them, in their dressing room, riding through the dark countryside, trying to escape the fanatics, and observing England from the other side of the glass. Now, we're all Americans here, and the one thing that Americans are used to, they're used to constantly being under the scrutiny of other people. For example, Beyond the Fringe comes to New York, and it's a satire by Britishers, mostly about America. And we sit out there and applaud, you know, and somehow it seems right that Peter Cook should tell us what's wrong with Congress, you know? Somehow Peter Cook knows all of the things that are happening in the American presidential election and so on, but it never works the other way. I suppose you're aware that if I were to appear in Britain, they would not immediately nominate me to play Richard the Lionhearted. And yet, are you aware that they're casting a movie here in America, and they've just recently cast a man to play Abraham Lincoln? Guess what nationality he is? We're going to have a British Abraham Lincoln. And somehow, you know, that makes him more official, you know? I mean, the idea that Laurence Olivier or somebody like that is playing Lincoln seems a lot more real than if, say, an American were to play Lincoln. Because, you know, there's a little thing there. Well, being a good American, of course, I have been completely awash in Britain ever since I was a kid. We take English literature in school. We go to drama. We study English poets, English history. In fact, most of us know more about English history than we do American history. And so now I find myself in England, in the real thing, sitting in a little tiny, superheated, stinking, smelling dressing room, knee-deep in fish and chips and beer with the Beatles. England's final answer to Richard the Lionhearted. You know, it's a weird thing. And out in the darkness, I can hear the sound of millions of girls screaming. It's a children-girl thing, you know, in England. And you hear, it sounds like 1,000 sirens going off in the distance. It's just a high-pitched wail. It goes, whee! Goes in waves, whee! And then one of the Beatles says to another Beatle, I think it was George, said to Paul, he said, Paul, you're a Beatle. And Paul says, aye. And George says, Paul, you're a Beatle. Pass a miracle. Walk on water. Walk on water. And Paul says, okay. And he goes to the window, sticks his head out with the hair, you know, wow! The whole world explodes. He throws it back again, and he turns back to me, and he says, are you Beatle people? I said, no. He said, well, then sit down and have a beer. Well, I'll tell you that the sense of unreality, I think that these people feel, nothing is real out there anymore. And they have to drive at night at 3 o'clock in the morning through secret roads that are guarded by police so that people will not attack out of the bushes. And at night, when you're sitting in the back seat of the car and the Beatles are hiding down on the floor at 3 o'clock in the morning, going God knows where, being protected from God knows what, you begin to have a slight realization of what mankind is about. And you don't really quite like it. And at the same time, you can't help it because you're part of it. It's like being in the Army. Any of you in the Army in this crowd? Well, you know the sense of being in the Army and you've got a uniform on. You're walking around like other people, and yet you're not part of it. I wonder whether or not anyone has ever recorded that one facet of Army life, that when you're in the Army, the other people are totally unreal. The civilians. They seem to be another race. And that's the way it is with the Beatles. Today, the world is like Mars to the Beatles. They're the only real thing, just four of them sitting there, eating a steak, drinking a beer, and it's all brought to them. You know, they're never allowed to walk on the street like normal people. They're never allowed to even look out of the window because riots. How would you like that fantastic sense of power that if all you had to do was go to the window and say, kill each other, boom, boom, the knives would come out. That's exactly what they do, and they do it often, you know. Once in a while, Paul will sit there, you know, and they get a little bored, and they're all sitting around in their T-shirts. And outside, you can hear the rest of the acts going, you know. You can hear the rock and roll roaring around. And suddenly, Lennon, or maybe Paul, will get up. You like a little excitement? And Ringo says, That's Ringo's total vocabulary, incidentally. It's not one of the brighter people. But he's sweet, girls, all right. I wish I could tell you the real stories of the Beatles. And Ringo goes, And then Paul goes up. Usually he goes up to the window. He says, watch this. I'll try to do the Liverpudlian accent. He says, oh, watch this. He walks to the window, and he has maybe a potato chip. Anything that's just an ordinary little piece of nothing, a cigar butt, you know. He's got a paper cup. He said, watch this. He looks out the window, and he just peeks out a little bit. You know, they have drawn shades, and everybody is out there. The whole city of Glasgow is out there. Millions of them. And just 5 minutes before, you know, you have an idea of the kind of madness this thing is, because we're sitting in this tiny little dressing room, sweaty, hot, showbiz. These are rock and roll performers, you know, and They're very simple, very earthy, basic people. They're just like showbiz people everywhere. They don't read. You know, they just sit there, see? And there's a little knock on the door, just like this. Now, I want to show you a scene. Little knock on the door, and one of them looks up and says, "Who's there?" And the door opens just a crack, and it's one of their managers. And he says, "Excuse me, Paul. The Lord Mayor of Glasgow is here. The Lord Mayor." Ringo turns to Paul, pops his ear. John goes, spits. And then somebody says, "Let him in." And the little Lord Mayor comes in. Remember, this is the Lord Mayor of the city of Glasgow. He comes in with his hat in his hand. He says, "Are you the Beatles?" And they say, "Aye, we're the Beatles. Who are you?" He says, "I'm the Lord Mayor of Glasgow." "Ah, politician, eh?" "Yes, yes." "We got to get back to work." He says, "Thank you for letting me in." And the door closes. Now, what kind of madness is this? I observed this. And then we are in Dundee. Now, Dundee is a Scottish town on the coast of Scotland, and it's hard and rough. It's a fisherman's town. And in fact, I'm not in town 5 minutes, and I'm walking past this little tiny store, and the window is filled with knives. Millions of tough, rough-looking knives. And I'm curious, you know, it doesn't impress me as the J.D. sort of town, you know. It looked like 42nd Street. But these are real big, bone-handled knives, you know, the real stickers, real toad stickers, you know. And so I go into this place, I figure I'm going to get myself a real souvenir this time, you know. Something that I can use back home. See, I'm in radio, friends, you know. And so I go into this joint, and here's this little lady standing back, a little Scottish lady, and I go into the store, and her little daughter or something is with her, and they are totally unused to seeing Americans. Americans do not come to Dundee, especially in the off-season. And especially they don't come to a little second-rate, what appears to be an Army-Navy store, where they had a collection of old maces from old crusades, you know, left over. That's the way with the British Isles, you know. You can buy some great surplus there. So I walk in, and I'm standing there, and their Scottish dialect is so almost totally unintelligible. And I said to her, "What are the knives out in the window? I'd like to look at some knives." And she says, "Sure, those knives are for killing sharks." I said, "For what?" "They're for killing sharks. The fishermen here use them for sharks." I said, "The fishermen use them for sharks?" I mean, this is not like Jones Beach, you know. And so I bought myself a knife, and I walked out with this fantastic knife, great big toad sticker. And it came with a leather sheath. So I'm very little embarrassed by this thing. What do you do with it? You walk down the street, and they didn't wrap it, you know. They don't hardly wrap anything in England. I've got a big knife. And walking down the street, and I didn't go 20 feet, and a man came right at me wearing high rubber boots, and he had a toad sticker that went down to his kneecap. Just walk, clunk, clunk, clunk. He walks past me. Great big Scottish shark fishermen. They fish for shark livers there. And you could smell him a mile. He walks past, you know, my eyes clouded up. And he... By the way, I'd love to show you how. I just wish we weren't on the air. I've been working on it. I will entertain my friends with this, but you ought to hear a Scotsman swearing. It is, honest to God, it sounds like a fantastic symphony. I have never seen creative swearing like you hear a Scotsman. And I sat in the back of a Scottish taxi cab in Glasgow, which is one of the toughest cities in the Western world. And we were going through the side streets of Glasgow, and this guy kept up a steady stream of stuff. At first, I thought he had bad tappets. I thought his valve springs were bad. He just swore steadily. And it's all in Scottish, and somehow when it comes out with those rolling R's and that, it sounds cute. You know, we go right down the mainstream, right down the mainstream of traffic, and I become aware of a sullen undertone of the same thing going on. And that's the way you drive a cab in that town. I don't think they use gas. Just what a tough city. So now you've got an idea of what Dundee is like. It's rough, tough, you see. And I am there with the Beatles. The Beatles are playing this little theater. There's about 3,000 seats in it, and it's bigger than the town, you know. And the Beatles have arrived, and the fishermen are coming in. Big guys with boots and funny hats on with the knives and stuff. They're clomping in. And now we're in the dressing room in Dundee, Scotland. It's a very strange thing for an American to get inside of life. Most of us, Americans, are rarely admitted to this kind of a world. And the Beatles were sitting in their dressing room waiting for their dinner. And out just where the sea began, you could hear millions of Scottish kids screaming. Just a steady beat. You could just hear it coming in, and the rain was coming down, and you could hear the toad stickers clanking out there. Oh, it was a strange, surrealistic world, and I just wondered what it was all about. You know, have you ever had these moments when everything seems so unreal that if you were to walk across the room and to float 6 inches right off over the carpet, it wouldn't surprise you, you know? I couldn't put anything together. I had only been out of America about 3 days, and now I'm in the back room of a ramshackle old theater in Dundee, Scotland. And you could smell oatmeal. You know, the Scots live on oatmeal. You could smell oatmeal, and they drink Scotch whiskey. They really do drink it. And when you walk through the streets, you can smell it everywhere. You're stepping over, you know, all the time. Well, they really put it away. And the Beatles are sitting there, and they're passing it around in paper cups. We're in Scotland. I'm trying to get my bearings, and there's a knock at the door. Now, get this scene. This is the Beatles in Dundee, Scotland. This is an ancient part of the British Empire. There's a knock at the door, and one of the Beatles says, "Who is there?" And I hear another little knock, and it's their secret knock, which says, "It's okay, open up." And so Lennon goes over, and he takes the door, and he just sort of peeks out, and there is one of their managers, and he says, "A countess is here." And Lennon turns to the other Beatles, and he says, "A countess." And Ringo says, "Let her in. Let's take a look at her." I says, "A countess coming to see this, you know?" And sure enough, the door opens, and in came this magnificent, she really looked exactly the way you think a regal countess should look. She's dressed in furs. She's tall, thin. She has a peculiar kind of ring she wore. She just sort of held her hand this way. And she walked in, and behind her were two ladies in waiting and a tiny little chauffeur wearing little black hats and black puttees, you know, like those in the, you know. And I'm standing there, you know, watching this. My God, I had the terrible feeling of being an eavesdropper on something I shouldn't have seen, you know. And the countess comes in, and here are the Beatles, all with their shirts off. One is sitting there picking his toes, his shoe is off. I'm telling you the truth. I'm not inventing it. They're all sitting, and not one of them gets up. You know, they're all sitting like this. And the countess comes in, her furs trailing behind her, and you could just hear the sound of these medieval trumpets rising, you know. It was the British Empire. She walks in and stands in the middle of the room. Nobody said a word. Until finally Paul said, "I hear you're a countess." She says, "Yes, I am a countess." "Yes, yes. Are you the Beatles?" And Ringo belts John in the short ribs and says, "Get this, are we the Beatles? Is she putting you on?" You know, their hair all hanging there. "Are you the Beatles?" It's like asking, "Are you Santa Claus?" You know, the big beard. And So one of them finally, I said, well, when are they going to ask her to sit down or something, And here they are, they're shoving potato chips in their mouth, One's eating the potato, one guy's got a piece of fish hanging out, like the scotch, they're belting it out. And she finally says, we have driven all the way over from the castle to see you. And I'm so delighted that you've allowed us to come backstage. I love your work. Ringo says, huh? And she says, yes, we play your records at the castle all the time. And somehow I had that, suddenly I could hear it. Rock and roll, booming out through the castle. You just don't want to think of England, do you? You don't want to see C. Aubrey Smith and Laurence Olivier digging Presley, walking around spitting and yelling. Well, finally, there was a long pregnant pause, and Lennon, who is the most civilized of the Beatles, suddenly he comes to and he says, sit down, countess, sit down. And she sits down. Have you ever seen a countess sit? She really did, and all the Beatles are looking at her. So she sits down, and her furs go down like this, and she's got a ring. She sits and looks, and she says, which Beatle are you? And the Beatle in question says, George, like in King. So help me, I heard it. And she goes, yes. How funny. And then Lennon says to her, he says, are you a real countess? She says, yes, I am. And then Paul says, where's the count? She says, well, he didn't come tonight. And we waited for a moment. It was one of those great moments of classical human behavior. It sort of hung there for a second. And then Lennon said to her, he says, what kind of castle do you live in? She says, well, it's a very big one. It's called Glamis Castle. Yes. Glamis Castle, in case you don't know, is the oldest of all the great castles in England. And she's talking to 4 Englishmen, remember that? And one of them says, Glamis, where's that? Even I knew, And she says, well, it's you turn left at the road down at the end, and you turn at Route 7, and you just continue on. You can't miss it, It's a big castle. And McCartney says, how many rooms does it have? And so help me, she turns to her lady-in-waiting and says, oh, Lady Barbara, that would be in your department. How many do we have? And Lady Barbara sat for a second. She says, I believe 238. And Paul says, you've got plenty of room for your relatives, haven't you? And she says, yes, we have a lot of room. And Lennon then comes back with a question, by the way, that is a pure American question. When was it built? Only Americans ask this. And Lennon said, how old is it? She said, I believe it was started in 1067. 1067. And I'm listening to this fantastic story of the British Empire unfolding right out there before me. And the Countess finally said, you could see she was the master of all difficult situations. This is the thing that sets the aristocracy apart and above us. And she didn't know how to end the conversation. And she finally said, she says, you'll have to come and visit me. Why don't all of you come to the castle? And Paul said, hey, that ain't a bad idea. We're staying in a damn motel tonight. And you can see automatically, the poor countess can see 4 drunken Beatles arriving at 4 in the morning yelling with 8 million fans in Glamis Castle.
And she says, that would be lovely. Now, may I have your autographs? And one after the other, Paul, George, Ringo. And that's the end of it. And she walks to the door, and the Beatles, not once getting up, fish and chips, their gin going, slugging away their scotch. She gets to the door, and one of them says, "Oh, Countess, have you eaten? Would you like something to eat?" She says, "It looks very good." And out she went to the sound of more trumpets. Well, I sat there, and I thought, for crying out loud, I'm an American. I shouldn't have seen this. Somehow it didn't seem right that I should see a thing like this. That, was she slumming or were the Beatles slumming? It was very hard to tell. She went out, walked down the hallway, and Paul said to John, he said, "You guys, that's a real countess." And John says, "Yes, I've seen countesses before. They always wear coats like that." And Ringo goes, And that was the total discussion of the Countess and her life. Now, the next night, I thought, this is a fluke. And so the big concert went on, and the people screamed and yelled, and it was almost like a kind of fever in the air. It was like the bubonic plague. It was very hard to it's hard to describe it to you. It's as if the entire country has decided it's going out of its skull. And they have appointed the Beatles to be the reason. And the Beatles recognize now they don't even sing anymore. They just go out on the stage, and woo, it starts, and they wave a little bit, and then they go off. And the roaring continues for hours. So about 2 hours later, I'm in the back seat of the Beatles' car, and we're heading for the Scottish Highlands. Have any of you ever been in the Highlands? It's a very interesting experience. These hills climb all the way to the sky, and the country is probably the most beautiful in the world, next to Switzerland, and possibly even Switzerland included. You can't believe it. And it's at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and we are screaming down a highway at 95 miles an hour in a gigantic Austin Princess, which is about the size of a let's say a super deluxe Rolls. They've got it floored, and we're screaming through this little country road, taking corners on one wheel, just woo, and I'm sitting in the back with the Beatles, I said, "What's the matter? What are you doing here, Shepherd? What is this?" And they're all sitting back there changing clothes. Do you know that their clothes zip on? Are you aware that those little skinny suits they wear, that you can't put them on? And that their pants zip all the way up the back. They have a guy that zips them all up, and they walk out. They stand like this. That's why, have you noticed the Beatles don't move much when they're on stage? They don't make any Elvis movements or anything, just sort of stand there, like little dolls, they wave. They got springs and everything. They're all zipped up, and the curtain goes down. It's wild. The curtain goes down. They all turn to the right, and a guy rushes out, and he goes, "Ooh, ooh, ooh, ooh." Then they walk. The Beatles. Oh, what an insane time. So I'm riding through this countryside with them. I can't believe it, I says, this is England. This is what we in America all have a vague sense of inferiority about. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, the road was lined with dour-looking people, just looking out from behind haystacks, waiting for the Beatles to go by. 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and you could see them holding lanterns up, and we're sailing through the countryside, and every car that they saw, they would throw rocks at. This is a form of love in Scotland, by the way. And you'd see the rocks bouncing across the street, and the people said, "Get down there, here we come, watch the one by the haystack. Watch that nut." And you boom, boing, you hear the rocks. And I'm sitting there and says, "Oh, what would King Arthur have thought, How would he have handled it?" Well, we went deeper and deeper into the countryside until we finally arrived at the lock where we were staying. The Beatles, in case you're interested, There are more security regulations governing the places where the Beatles stay than that which governs the president. Seriously. That people are sworn to secrecy all over the countryside, and wherever they stay, they always stay outside of town in the most likely place. The most likely place for anything but Beatles. Like they'll stay in a little place that's marked diner. They just stay there overnight. Or they'll be in a little place marked motel, and they'll stay there. Well, we were staying in a tiny inn next to an ancient Scottish loch, Loch Earn, which is one of the most ancient and most revered. And in fact, Bonnie Prince Charlie had fought a battle 20 feet away from where I was staying. That little plaque out there. Rob Roy had robbed somebody 20 feet outside the other way. Yes, I'm serious. And everywhere you saw this strange tartan quality of the world, because this is really Scotland. We arrived about 3 o'clock in the morning, and the innkeeper is there. You can see that this is the greatest moment of his entire life. He had been knighted. He had been designated. It was like a visitation. It was like a second coming or something happening there. And he stood by the door, sort of bent over, tugging at his forelock. Are the Beatles there? And I said, yes, they're going to be. He said, are you with them? And I says, yes, I'm one of the party. He says, may I shake your hand? Put her there. I'm one of the Beatle party, you know. Somehow that made me it made me part of this whole scene. And the Beatles slowly straggled up the hill in darkness, and one after the other, they came in through the door, and a couple of managers arrived out and back in their little cars. And we went into the bar. I want to give you a typical vignette in the Beatle world that you never hear about. The strange world of the... I can only say that this is the world of... I guess the word would be almost delirium. It's like the world has become delirious. It's surrealistic. Remember, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. We're next to a Scottish loch. An old loch with hills surrounding it. There's not a sound for miles. It's a sullen, quiet, angry countryside. And all of us go up to the bar. Little tiny bar in the inn. Paul, John Lennon, George, Ringo, the manager. And he brings out a bottle of sherry. This apparently was a bottle of sherry he'd saved since the last coronation. And he was saving it for the next one. He brings out the sherry, and he says, would you like a glass of sherry? John says, sherry? What's sherry? Who drinks sherry, man? He says, what will you have? I have anything you want. He's got scotch. He's got all the fine stuff there. Each one of us was poured a little drink. We started to sip the drink when, without warning, there was a sound outside in the darkness, a hum, like the hum of angry bees at 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was getting closer and closer. You could just hear it. It was coming like a big storm. And the Beatles are doing nothing. They're just sort of standing. And I said to the man behind the desk, I says, what is this, a storm? He says, I don't know what that sound is. It must be something on the road. And just when he got this out of his mouth, the door slams open, and there stands a Scottish constable. And he says, are the Beatles staying here? And the man behind the bar says, yes, sir, yes, sir. He says, I have just called out all available men. There are 20,000 people coming this way. What are you going to do about it? What have you done to us? And the Beatles calmly, just drinking their scotch. And that night we spent in total darkness with a ring of policemen in the hills. 500 policemen keeping the entire British Isles away. And you could hear the hum of them out there. You could hear them in the trees. You could hear them in the hills. And once in a while you'd hear a little wave of, ah! Just, wow! And it would trail off And it's now 3:30, 3:45, and a couple of the very famous local gentry had been allowed to come and see the Beatles at first hand. One of these strange little vignettes. A tall, thin girl, obviously the sweet Beatle fan type, you know. She comes over and she stands behind one of the Beatles. She's just been admitted to see them. She can't believe it, you know, because they're not real to people anymore. They're kind of like dolls or strange little automatons. And here they are, they're sitting there. And she walks over behind and she just sort of looks down, and by mistake she brushed one of the Beatles' coat. And he whirled on her and he says, "Get your filthy hands off me." Well, he wasn't being funny. And she sort of ducked back. He says, "Nobody touches me after midnight." She said, "Yes, yes." And then there was a kind of an embarrassed pause, and the Beatles kept eating. And finally she said, "May I have your autographs?" And one of the other Beatles looked up at her and says, "Will you clear out?" And she says, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." And out the door she went. And the Beatles sat in total control of their world. They would either admit people or they would deny them. They would either give them an audience or they would turn them down. And believe it or not, it got to the point with me, you know. I'll tell you, there's a funny thing in human beings where I began to feel special myself because they talked to me. Yes, this is the kind of nuttiness that must have created a Hitler. Must have felt good to a guy, you know, to walk in and have Mr. Hitler say, "Oh, hello, hey, there goes Hans. Hi, Hans." How many of you would like to be greeted by first name by, say, Lucky Luciano? No, it's a secret thing. We all have a secret desire to somehow be greeted on a first name basis by somebody who is a real myth and a legend. And up to this point, you know, I had been a non-believer. And I saw this happening. Nobody got angry at the Beatles. Oh, no. When the Beatles would throw somebody out like the Countess, just hurl her out in the street, it was all heard. And she felt pleased to have spoken with them for a moment. And so it got to the point where I would come in, and John would look up and say, "How are you doing, Gene?" I would glow. The Beatles recognized me, you know? And when one of them would say to me, "How would you like a drink, huh? Here, have a drink." And he'd hand me the drink. The great warmth would come out again. And I realized that I had been admitted to Olympus. I was allowed to be on the same plane with a world phenomenon. Fascinating. And I kept trying to say, don't worry. I kept trying to say to myself later, I'd get out of the room. You know, I was over there on a special assignment to do a piece for a major magazine on the Beatles. And I would get out of the room, you know, and they've talked to me. We've sat and had drinks and stuff, and I would get out into the privacy of a hotel aisle or a hotel hallway, and I'm walking along, and all of a sudden I says, "What are you doing? This is a rock and roll group. These are the Beatles. For God's sake, Shepherd, get a grip on yourself." And then the door would open down there, and McCartney would stick his head out and he'd say, "Hey, Gene, when you come back, knock twice. We'll let you in. We don't want to let anybody else. Just knock twice." He'd slam the door, and then I'd say, "I know what I'm doing. God recognizes me." Well, you know, I learned something then. I learned how impossible it must be for a reporter to remain objective in the presence of the very great. Notoriety can be greatness, you know. I remember one day down in the Yankee bullpen before a ball game, one of the hard-hitting, angry writers from the Post, you know, the Post works in anger, you know, like other people work in clay and marble, you know, really bugged. They look at the And one of these hard-hitting, angry reporters, you know, almost all of the really angry writers are very undersized little guys with thick glasses. It's what makes it come out, you know. And I'm standing back down there, way out by the bullpen. You know where the Yankees have the bullpen, way out in the corner there? You expect to see nobody out there. Well, standing right next to the bullpen wire fence is Roger Maris. He's just standing there. He's been chasing fly balls. And you know how Maris stands anyway. He's got that snotty way of standing, you know, just that real loose way. You know, one hip is flung out, you know, he's got his hat, that straight-on hat. He's got the mitt there. And Maris is just surveying his entire kingdom. You know, from out around that bullpen, you can see all of Yankee Stadium. You can see the press box. You can see 80,000 people. You can see those 3 tombstones over here. And Roger is he's in his milieu. And he really is the king of it. So I am standing out there. I don't say anything. I'm an observer. I make it a rule of thumb is to keep your mouth shut unless spoken to. I found this works very well. So I'm out there sort of walking past. I'm seeing Raj. Raj is standing there with that big number 9 on his back. He's wearing the home uniform. He spits. And I see this little New York Post writer come scurrying around the edge of the path. Little man, you know, big. He comes up, you know. Hi, Raj. Raj looks down. Hi, Ray. I've invented a name. He just says, hi, Ray. That little guy straightened up. You could see his gut pull in. Raj is doing nothing. He's watching the flags, you know. He doesn't even know. He's just waiting for his time at bat, you know, in the cage. And the little man says to him, how does it look today, Raj? Do you think we'll do it today? Do you think we'll do it today? Do you think we'll do it? And Raj just simply says, I don't know, Whitey's going. It's pretty good. The little guy says, that's what I thought. Looks good. He scurries away, and the next day, I read this piece in the Post, and it's a hard-hitting expose of why they should trade Roger Maris. And I thought, gee, you know, so much of this is that problem of objectivity. Have you ever thought how it must be to travel around the country in a presidential train where you're really with the president, and the president comes in every 5 minutes after giving one of these whistle-stop speeches and sits down next to you, eats a sandwich, drinks a beer maybe, or has a glass of milk, begins to know you, begins to know that your name is Myrtle, this is old Ray here, and there's Fred. How can you possibly keep your objectivity? I know many a good drama critic who is totally ruined that day that Olivier begins to call him Bert. Forget it. It's never going to happen again. Never be able to observe the scene with that old cold light of objectivity. And as I rode throughout that countryside, I found myself slowly becoming not only a Beatle fan, but a Beatle. Yes, I began to, you know, when the screams were out there, they were screaming for me. You know, I was sitting in the crowd with them. I was part of it, you know, they were me. And I'd walk to the window. You know, one thing about Beatle fans, they scream at anything that moves. You got to understand that anything that moves, they scream at. And even if it doesn't move, if they think it's moving, they scream. And so one of the band boys, one of the kids who worked in the Edinburgh Theater, all he did was set up the drums, you know, that kind of jazz. He came backstage, and there's this little window looking out over the alley where there are 18 million kids screaming for the Beatles. And he was talking to one of the Beatles about setting up the equipment. You know, just a straight conversation. Like, what do you want it? Do you want it back over there or over here? And one of the Beatles says, don't worry about it, man. I'll adjust it myself. He said, okay. And then he turned and walked to the window. Just stood there for a minute. and then pulled the curtain back and looked out. And there's a fantastic, Wah! He pulls it back. He turns back to the crowd and he says, just once I wanted him to scream for me. Just once. Now that sounds like I invented it, but so help me, that's exactly what happened. He says, just once I wanted him to scream for me. Which brings up a point. How many of you secretly scream for whatever it is you scream for, whether it's a presidential candidate, whether it's a philosophy, whether it's a Beatle? How many of you scream? How many of us scream just out of the sheer exuberance of screaming for something? Just screaming for anything. Anything that somehow will respond to our screams, like bow a little bit. Yeah. I have a feeling that one day, in some of our major countries, there will be mechanical devices which will be set up to receive and record the quality and the quantity of screams that we can hurl at. And that we will have favorite machines. Somebody will like the green one. Somebody will like the red one. Somebody will like the blue one. And every night they will put another one of these on stage for us to go scream at. Now, hear that? Whose watch? Strange. But it's a curious thing to sit backstage in with the Beatles and see the kind of madness they engender. Do you know that when the Beatles are on stage, not one person listens? Are you aware of that? And a good 25 to 30 minutes before the Beatles come out, the thing starts. Their screaming starts. And they don't sit, of course. They all stand. And have you ever seen paintings by Hieronymus Bosch? Well, I stood on the stage. Let me tell you, the wildest scene of all is not to watch the Beatles. But I stood on the stage, apron, just back of the curtain where you could see out and they couldn't see you, and I watched the audience. And whoever was staging this, I'm telling you, it was a fantastic job of staging. They had red lights playing over the audience. Just back and forth, red and green spotlights, up into the balcony, and over here into the loges, and the bottom here into the theater pit. And this entire mass of screaming, waving, insane, wild human beings, you couldn't even relate to it as human beings. It was like you were looking at some kind of swarm of beetles or gnats or some kind of an insane wasp nest that's been stirred up. And then the final night happened. It had to happen. Even the Beatles themselves had never seen anything like this. We were playing a town called Leeds. Now, Leeds is an industrial city, just an ordinary kind of place. It's like Gary, Indiana, as a matter of fact, or like Union City. You know, there's a lot of factories and refineries. Sort of a tough, nothing city in England, an ancient one, but very nothing. And nobody was expecting what happened. It just came out of the combustion. The Beatles were on stage, and the waves were coming up, screaming, just roaring up, one after the other, and it was getting higher and higher. And the man standing next to me was their road manager. He'd heard thousands of these, and he said to me, he says, "This doesn't sound right. This doesn't sound right." And he called two of the stagehands. He says, "Get over back here. Something's going to happen." He said, "It sounds funny." And sure enough, it did. It was getting more and more. It was coming in wave after wave and quicker. And suddenly, without any warning, it was like a big wave coming right out of the ocean. It broke right over the parapet, and there were about 50 girls on stage. Just went boom. And the Beatles, they staggered back, their little zippers popping, And the Beatles, by the way, are all about 4'3", And this great wave of girls all poured up on the stage, and it was a fantastic melee, and the stagehands, constables, and me, by the way, we all rushed out, and big scream for us, part of the show. And what do you think the girls were doing? It was unbelievable. The girls were tearing off their clothes, not the Beatles, but theirs. literally tearing their clothes off on the stage. There must have been 50 of them. Well, here they are throwing these chicks back like footballs into the crowd, and they were all about 8 years old, 9 years old. You grab one and whoop, her bloomers are flying, and the rest of the crowd goes, wow! And we're throwing them back. One of them had crawled under the stage. How she got under, nobody knows, under the stage, and she came out of the wings like a shotgun shot. Just boom! She hit out there like a little bowling ball. She rolled 3 times and knocked Ringo's drums over. And as she rolled, you could see her peeling, just wildly peeling. Ringo grabbed her by the neck and pushed her down. Get away from me! And she let go a fantastic... Ah! And Ringo says, pull the curtain down, man! And boom, down it came. And the Beatles were trapped with 7 naked 5-year-olds. What a moment, I'll tell you. A great moment in the English theater. Well, I'll tell you, they're throwing the kids off the bow. And, of course, that ended the show for that night. And the next day, the press blamed the Beatles. The press said the Beatles, once again, have caused violence to strike our small city here. And I'm thinking of all those parents at home with little girls named Agatha. Little skinny girls eating oatmeal. And the mother says, did you enjoy the Beatles last night? Yes, Mommy. And I can only see a picture of little Agatha flying through the air, trailing her pants behind. No, I suspect... and I began to have a real understanding of what this is all about. It has nothing to do with rock and roll. And I'm curious, and the Beatles often talk about this. In fact, the Beatle manager, a couple of them, this is a subject that always comes up, is, I wonder what the next act is going to be like. Well, already they're beginning to pop out. There's one in England that comes out on the stage, and there are 4 guys, and they wear their hair down to their waist. And it's all in a bouffant hairdo that goes trailing on down. Have you ever heard of that group? They wear pink sweaters, and they wear these tight stretch pants that girls wear. There's little things that girls wear, and they come out with high heels. Oh, yeah, I'm serious. I'm not exaggerating. They're the biggest new thing in England. Now, I can't tell you what the audience does with that crew, because we have women and children listening to us. But I saw them work in London, and you cannot believe it. First of all, their audience isn't really little girls, it's something else. Well, in a manner of speaking, they're not little girls. It's a very difficult thing, this culture business, And when you get over and you get close to the underbelly of all this that's going on, you wonder just really in what direction. The third day I was there, Pravda came out with an editorial, and they had a picture of a riot that had occurred in one of the English cities over the Beatles, and it translated said, another example of Western decadence. And everybody says, oh, what is this stuff? What? And I thought, well, is it or isn't it? Are they telling the truth or are they not? Let me tell you of the night. Do you want to hear about the nightclub that I went into? It's the innest, hippest English nightclub. And the number one guest that night was Mandy Rice Davies. Oh, yeah, she was the number one exhibit that night. And I sat down next to this girl. It was a dark place, and the rock and roll is coming out. And it's wild. It's just a scene like twisting, writhing bodies. And the music is just booming out. And I'm an American, we're used to, the limelight, how innocent, I come in there and I sit down, look around, and the guy next to me says, would you like to meet Christine Keeler? I says, the Christine? Drapes and a toga and you're in business. Oh, yeah, yeah. You know, decadence, I think that one... Oh, hey, we're on the air again. Come on, let's give Ohio a big hand, crowd. Hey! Listen, you just don't know how it feels to have to live in Circleville. You people just go through. I mean, you know, some guys never leave Canton, Ohio. No wonder they think New York is a plot against them. Which it really is, in a way, you know. But speaking of plots, we're back here at the Limelight in the hearty, reliable Greenwich Village. A Fleischmann's yeast cake of passion here. And, yes, it's fermenting. I can feel it. We'll be here until about midnight or so. And if you're casting around for a cheapy place, we're here. You know, speaking of cheapy places, one of the great things about traveling, I mean really traveling. By traveling, I mean getting out of the tourist rut, really traveling, is it does the same thing to the traveler that being in the Army does to the soldier. It gives you a sense of anonymity and a sense of irresponsibility. I'm curious how many people who are very hip back here in the States who would never think of taking a picture of a statue in Central Park. All of a sudden, their basic slobism comes out in London. They just walk around, you know. You can be a slob. Nobody can see, you know. Even if you're a Village Voice writer, you can be a real slob in Greece, you know. Nobody's going to see you there, you know. And of course, it holds in all kinds of areas. Now, back home, I don't go to nightclubs. It just doesn't interest me much. Well, I'm in London. I'm there about the second or third day. And one of the Beatles says to me, he says, have you ever been to the Whoopee Club? Well, I'm giving it a name. It's a different name, by the way, than this. So this is an artificial name I've given it. So I says, no. He says, well, man, if you want to really see something, go to the Whoopee Club with me. I said, fine, all right. And so that night, long after everything had been put away, are you aware that in New York City, now wait, I'm going to let you in on something, people, that right here in New York City, there are little cells of inness, little places where the really in people, and they're allowed in because they are in, you know. I don't know how to express it. It's just, they're in, you know. These are the people who go through life and never pay for anything. The whole world is on an expense account as far as they're concerned. They even charge dying to the Diners Club when they die. They deduct it. These are people who never pay for a blessed thing in their lives, and they're the true ins. You might call them the borderline celebrities. In fact, they're even more celebrities than celebrities because, you know, a real celebrity has to do something. An actor has to work and be an actor to become a celebrity. He's a working man, in short. A painter has to paint to be in. But there is a special kind of celebrity who is above all of that sort of thing. And they're truly in. And all over the city of New York, there are these little rooms, little dark rooms. They're called this club and they're called that club. They're never mentioned in columns, by the way. They're that in. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, you have these little gatherings. You know, all those people that appear on the Johnny Carson show. And you sit in there, yeah, all the official people, you know. Oh, yeah, it's great. You know, you can't believe it. Zsa Zsa Gabor, they're all there, you know. And so when you get into one of these places, you're actually admitted. You feel like somehow that there is something in this business of heaven. That some people are admitted to some things and others aren't. And that we're all always before the great bar of justice. Now, the beautiful thing about most people is that they're not even aware that there is an in. These are the true out, you know. They're just... They're all looking at me dumbly like I'm inventing this, you see. This is the great lumpen proletariat. And the guys that are in have the most fantastic disdain for that lumpen proletariat out there, that great population made of cream of wheat. You know, the people that they run over with their Alfa Romeos, you know, that kind of, you know. Oh, yeah, I'm serious. There is a real aristocracy in this world, and they have the complete disdain for those out there. And that includes everything morally, you see. That the morality that the lumpen proletariat abides and lives by, that is a sign of outness, literally. And that the more you behave in the accepted pattern of behavior, the less likely you are to ever be admitted in. Now, I suspect that if Nero was around, Nero would have 5 of these little establishments going. They, as a matter of fact, have existed all through history. All through history. And usually, most of the people in a civilization are totally unaware of this. It's just they don't even know that it's there. And yet these people are a kind of leader. Because after you've been to a few of them, you recognize that what is going on in here is what will be going on out there 5 years from now. But what will be going on in here then is unimaginable. Totally unimaginable. And so one of the Beatles says, "Why don't you come to the Whoopee Club?" And I says, "The Whoopee Club?" And he says, "The Whoopee Club." And I, immediately I think of something like with girls dancing, and cigarettes and all that stuff, the hat check girl, and, the whole bit, see. I'm really a lumpen proletariat. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't, on the radio yet, on the John Gambling station. Gee. So I said, yeah, I'm sure, I'll go there. And he says, wait, this is quite a thing, So that night, the show is over. We finish our work. The Beatles have finished making $8 million. I have finished observing them. Everything is settling back now to a normal thing. And of course, in a city like London, a Beatle can get around with comparative ease because, it's a fantastically big city and all the men have got their hair like this. So, it's just another one of the goops, that's all. And so we are sitting in the back seat of a cab, me and this Beatle. We're going, we go up and down little side streets, I figure, where are we going? What is the side? Because I keep thinking in terms of, the Great White Way, Broadway, the Copa, and all, the Latin Quarter. And he says, the Whoopee Club. And when he said the Whoopee Club to the guy who was driving the cab, I noticed a very peculiar thing. The cab driver gave a sudden quick look back. He says, aye. And he sort of scrunched down. He didn't know who he was with, and he wasn't taking any chances. He just knew about the Whoopee Club, that's all, it's legendary, so I didn't know it until, years after a week, but I saw immediately. So up and down the side streets we go. London streets at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning have a certain mausoleum quality about it. It's a very spooky city. To me, London is the most foreign of all cities. I say this to you as an American, because you're constantly under the impression you can talk their language. You're always under the illusion of contact, and it never quite works, and you wonder why. You keep feeling that everything is a little out of focus, and you're always on the verge of a fist fight. And either they're going to hit you, you sense there's a certain stretching of the muscles there, or else you feel like, well, what do you mean? You want to go down and grab him. You don't get that feeling in Holland, because in Holland they just go, you go, yeah. And then you pay, Everything's fine, no problem. This works out great, and wherever you go like that. But in England, you know what I'm doing to this day now? It's funny, when you walk around England, and everything in the windows, there's prices on it. It always says 310 6D, or some little funny thing like that. And you automatically divide everything you see, or multiply it by 3, or divide by 3, or something. And you look there and you say, oh, that's $7. That's not bad. $7 for a Rolls Royce. and And you walk in there, and it turns, you can't quite figure out. Now I'll walk around, and I'm looking in the Bond clothing store, and I'm translating it into pounds to figure out whether I'm getting taken or not. So you get this funny sense of the enigmatic in England. It's a very enigmatic country. You have the feeling that they're sweeping an awful lot of stuff under the carpets, but you can't find the carpet. You just have this sense like you'll meet some very important man, like he's the head of the God department. You meet him, see, and he's Sir Malcolm something, and you sit down with him, and you note that his collar is dirty. This is and not only dirty, it's very worn around the back. And you don't know what to say, and whether he's a Slav. And he speaks in this beautiful Oxonian, fantastic language, and all the while he keeps spilling soup on his pants. Very peculiar, you're always trying to put it in focus. And all the while he is saying, of course, this is the one thing about the Americans, they're certainly such boors. You don't quite know what to say, Where does boorishness stop and a bad set of false teeth begin? Well, I'm walking through the streets, and finally we get to this corner, and he stops the car. And it looks like a closed block of office buildings. It's like if somebody at 3 in the morning took you down to Wall Street. Everything's closed. There's nothing on the streets at all. Darkness. Boy, when those London streets when they turn them off, man, it's like somebody has turned off a switch somewhere, and everything is off. The sound is off. They've turned the sky off. The clouds have been turned off, and everything. There's a kind of a fog settling in, see. And you can hear things echoing. And my little Beatle friend, his turtleneck all pulled up, he's walking ahead of me like this. I'm sort of running behind him. See, I figure as long as I'm sticking with the Beatle, it's all right. At least we can hear, I'm a Beatle, and the town will turn on, So I'm running behind this guy, and we get to a doorway in the side of a building. He opens it up, and there's a light in there. I go in with him. And at the other end of the corridor is one of these automatic elevators going up into what appears to be BBD&O. I mean, serious, it looks exactly like an office building. The kind up here in Manhattan, with all about 25 stainless steel elevators that says sign in and all that stuff. And here's an old man sitting there, and I walk in and say, what is the scene? He says, follow me. And the little man says, all right, will you please sign in? So the Beatle writes down Beatle. And so I don't know whether to write down my real name or the name I always use when I'm traveling, Charles Follinsby Apperson. Never know, So I write C.L. Apperson, and he says, all right. We stand there, presses the button, the one that says up. He presses, wait. Little red light goes on, the doors, and I am standing in a stainless steel elevator with a Beatle. Doors close, we stand. This is the damnedest night out I've ever had. I'm waiting for the whoopee sounds. I'm waiting for the sounds of a cigarette girl or somebody grabbing my coat and wanting a buck or something, We get up to the top of this building. We go about maybe 5 or 6 stories. Just goes zzz, and it goes unk. Opens like that. We step out into total, absolute Stygian darkness. Complete. I mean, it's like there isn't a light in 1,000 miles. And there's a man just sitting there on a 3-legged stool watching. Just looks at us. He is there, you see, to keep the outs out. Once in a while, one arrives, with a bucket and wants to sweep up or something, and they just throw him out. So he just looks at it, and he immediately sees it's a Beatle. And he goes, hey. And he says, Beatle. And he says, okay. So we go in through another doorway, and we're now in. Well, how can I describe it to you? Is there any Dante fan house here? I am serious. I am in a scene of unmitigated profligacy. It is passion unbridled in the darkness. And from loudspeakers all the way around the walls, you hear this just deafening sound of rock and roll. It's just going dunga 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 dunga, and I'm jumping, like this, and this Beatle just walks ahead like that. And you hear in the crowd, I Beatle. He says, I. And back we go, all the way through this room, and the writhing bodies, twisting and screaming, the hoopla and the uproar, and one after the other, you could see people peeling off. And finally, the Beatles says, sit down here. And I sit. Well, I immediately recognized that this was not a meeting of Little Orphan Annie's secret circle. That my magic decoder pin was not going to decode this. There were a lot of messages that didn't have anything to do with me going on. And sitting directly in front of me is a chick. See? Well, I'm Charlie Apperson. See, I figure I can make the scene pretty good here now. You know how Americans are. We're all in this, so I'm going to be part of it. And there's a chick sitting in front of me there. The darkness is getting darker. And they bring me a drink of some strange elixir. You know that the inn people don't drink stuff like you're drinking. I don't know what they made it out of, but I had 3 eyes instantly. They used some strange Mexican root, which is so esoteric and so evil that they haven't even yet made laws to keep it out. They don't want to... They don't even want the... There is such a thing. And they mix it with Coke. So they shove one of these in my hands, and my eyes are immediately adjusting. I got 3 eyes moving around like this, searchlights, my ears are singing. And I see this chick ahead of me, and I belt her between the shoulder blades. I say, hi, baby. Well, the chick turns around and gives me a look of sheer, solid hatred and turns back to the crowd. I said, well, take another slug of this strange drink. Passion is flowing through my veins like a deep, rich river now. This compost heap of live emotions, me, is beginning to pulsate. I say, hey, baby! And she turns to me and says, excuse me, my name is Chuck. Well, now, wait a minute. Are you applauding Chuck? Or the fantastic boo-boo I made? So I said, oh, hi, Chuck. Sit there, And I reckon, and here is Chuck sitting ahead of me there, and he's talking to a real chick. And they're discussing their hairdresser. Well, I sat there for about 3 minutes trying to get my bearings. Have you ever had this feeling of being suddenly thrown into a dark swimming pool and you don't know which way you're going? It's like waking up at 3 in the morning. You don't know. You know that feeling of waking up at 3 in the morning in bed and you don't know which way you're turned? You can't figure out which way is the bathroom, or anything. So you're laying there, you're lying down. Say, what do I do this way, You're looking around. You're lying. And here you're actually lying right, You wake up and you turn out, what happened? Well, this is the sense I was having in the Whoopee Club. I didn't know what to say to anybody because I didn't know what the language was. But all I knew was that I was definitely a spy. I was from the outside world, and they didn't quite know it yet because I had come in with a Beatle. Well, I sat for about 20 minutes trying to get my bearings, and all the seats were low. These seats that you see in Roman orgies? They're just low, long, flat things around the wall, not real seats. So if you want to sit on somebody or put your feet on somebody's ears or anything, it's just everybody's all lying around like this, and on each other, and all tangled, a twisted mass, and somebody kept pulling my leg, trying to get me into it, It's just all out there in front of me, just twisting and turning like so. And I stayed there for about 10 minutes on the edge of this thing, and they're tugging at my feet and hitting at me. And finally, the Beatle comes up for air. He surfaces briefly. And he says, "Hi, Gene, why don't you get in and join the fun?" What do you do? He says, "Just come in. It's all right. The water's warm." Well, I plunged in. Now, I want to tell you what happened. I literally did. I plunged right into the darkness. I stepped out of the little circle. They had little tiny lights where you could see the seats. And I stepped into the arena. And from ceiling, they had ceiling speakers. Oh, fantastic. About the size of those great big squares up there. Over the entire assemblage. It was a pit. Sort of hung down inside. And over the assemblage were these loudspeakers, not more than 1.5 feet over your head, turned up 1,000 dBs above S9, rock and roll. Physically, you want to just pounding you, boom, boom, boom. It's going, you hear the sound of Beatles screaming, and I get down in the middle of this mess, and they're twisting in the darkness. I can just see this wild thing, so I go off into it, I start twisting. I move it back. They're not dancing, remember that. They're not, I shouldn't use the term twist because you think in terms of dancing. It was just a strange gyration that everybody was doing in the darkness. And they'd bump into each other and they'd move off. Once in a while you'd step on somebody, they'd squish and they'd move off. You could hear squeals of laughter, out of the dark. Whee! Whoopee! And I had a feeling this was only the prelude. I had a sense that this was the opening movement of this party, whatever it is. And we went round and round, and then suddenly they turned off the PA. Just boom, like that. This is a signal for everybody to go back and have more gentian root. Or sassafras tea, or whatever that stuff was, which they sold for 5 pounds a clip. And so I go staggering back, and I sit down there, and immediately out of the darkness, they're handing these things out again. I've got another one, you see, and the first one is now turning my feet to stone. You know that funny feeling of you're beginning to fall asleep from the foot up, and it's working its way up to my knees now, you see. And the top of my head, I can hear little things going ding, 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 little bells ringing. Well, I take one sip of this, and I know I had better get out there on that dark street quick. Because one more sip and Shepard ain't coming home. I knew that I would not be on the air anymore and pulled into that maw of human debauchery, never to return. In fact, they tell me that there are many American celebrities that you know people. Have you often said to yourself, "I wonder what happened to Charlie Brown"? He's out there in the darkness somewhere. It's insane, and you come away. Speaking of insanity and passion pits, what station is this, friends? Come on, let's hear it. Yes, the John what station? Hey, let's give the Westport School announcements a big hand. Right, George. Well, I was kind of stunned for a minute. And I sipped a little bit of my drink. And sitting next to me was Mandy Rice Davies. I'm telling you, so help me, I'm raising my hand. It was Mandy Rice Davies. Now, what do you say to Mandy Rice Davies? Do you say, "I've admired your work"? Like I've been a fan for years. She's sitting right there, She has this beautiful English, strange kind of Cockney accent. And I said, "I'm an American." She says, "Yes, I know." Apparently, Americans are no fun in that department. And so there was a kind of a cool moment there, and I said, "Nice club." What do you say? And she just turned to me with a stone-cold look, and it swept through the crowd. An outsider was in. I knew it. The Beatle came back and sat next to me, and he said, "How you enjoying the club?" And just as he said that, the music started again, and they melted into the darkness. And I was alone. I watched for about 2 minutes this moiling mass in the darkness, the screams and the yelling, the great roar of rock and roll, and the giggles. And you could hear the sound of grapes being stepped on. Somewhere a violin was being played. Nero was on the scene. You know, you expected to see any minute guys with cloven hoofs running through. Little horns, you know, with fur pants on. Well, this went on for about 5 minutes, and I knew I had to go because it was going to be a stain on my soul I could never erase. And I walked to the door, and standing in the doorway was the guy. You know, you don't pay when you go in, you pay when you go out. Apparently, there's a lot of people who are holdovers in there. This is... If you want to come, you can stay 2 weeks, you know, if you want to. And I walk up to him, and he says, are you a member? And I said, I'm with the Beatles. I said, you're coming back tomorrow, huh, are you? I said, yes. And I go into that little stainless steel elevator all by myself. The doors close. Silence. You know that hermetically sealed feeling you get in these automatic elevators? And as I went down, every foot I went down, it became less real. It stopped. It went zoop. And there I am in the lobby. There's a little old man sitting there with he says, sign out, please. So I go over and I write 416. My shaky hand, and it's all swirling around me. My eyes are still bulging, and my feet are still that numb feeling they're asleep. I get back out on the street, and there's a single girl. I'm going to tell you a wild scene. This is exactly what happened. There's a tall, thin, beautiful girl standing under the streetlight. Now, you really see people in England at 4 in the morning. They really stand out, and she's standing under the streetlight. I came back out. Boy, the air. It's silent. Back of me is an office building that looks as innocent as Young and Rubicam does tonight. It does, you know. It's just a solid office building with the stainless steel front. And the girl comes, and I thought, uh-oh. Don't tell me this now on top of everything else, you know. She comes up, and she says, excuse me, please. Were you in the Whoopee Club? I thought, uh-oh, am I going to get busted? I mean, is this fuzz or what? You know, that instant feeling, fuzz. And I said, yes. She said, would you please take me in? I said, take you into the Whoopee Club? She says, yes, I've heard about it. I've heard that it's so much fun. And I said, well, I'm not a member. I was just taken in as a guest. She says, oh, you're so lucky. You're so lucky. I said, yeah, I guess so. George, you know, and I began to feel like a real debauched, rotten person. I'd been to hell and back, you know. I walk out, I hail a cab, and I get in the back of the cab, and we went about 5 blocks, and the guy turns to me, and he says, were you at the Whoopee Club? I says, yeah. Yeah. What are you going to make of it? He says, I had Mandy Rice Davies in my cab. I said, you're a lucky man. He says, yeah. And we rode through the quiet, still darkness of London, past Buckingham Palace, past those great ancient eating clubs, and finally back to my little pad. And I wondered about what side of England this is. What part of it is? Who is in the darkness out there? You know, right now, at this very moment, right here in America, right here, I'd say within about 3 miles of where we are, I would say that there are maybe anywhere from 2 to 5 cells just like that going on. Would you like to go, gang? Crazy. Would you like an invitation? No. Well, you know they don't. You notice her husband doesn't say anything. You know, they don't honor diner club cards there. And carte blanche, they don't honor. But you know the funny feeling of being out and suddenly being in is both a good feeling and a very scary feeling. And I had a sensation like that once in the Army. In case you're interested, somebody wanted to hear an Army story. Well, I'll tell you a funny one. This is part of the Army life that's never recorded. It's the sense of being out when you're in the Army. And all the other guys in the Army seem to be in. And you're just there. You got a funny suit on. When you're first in, you're walking around. And I am a ping pong player. I love to play ping pong. Are there any ping pong players in this crowd? Well, I happen to be a left-handed ping pong player. And in the Army, particularly in the Army Signal Corps, ping pong is a way of life. And you can hear the sound at 2 o'clock in the morning, guys whiling away their lives in the day room. You just hear ding-dong, ding, 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 dong, ding-dong, ding, 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 dong, dong, bah, ha, 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 ha. Then there's a pause, ding-dong, ding, ding, dong, dong. That's the Army, you see. Do you know that some guys, some staff sergeants I knew got 3 consecutive raises in ranks without ever giving up their paddle? They just played all day long. They'd come in, they'd say, you're a staff now, and they'd put another badge, ding, dong, ding. That's cadre, you see, and cadre gets very good at playing all the games that the guys who aren't cadre never get a chance to get near. Well, I had one brief moment when I was cadre. Now, how many of you guys know, all you guys been in the Army, you know what cadre means. That's permanent party. For those of you who are not in the Army, have you ever had the feeling in your life that there are people who are there permanently? In the office where you work, the real people, you're just there until they catch up with you. Well, that's cadre. They're there, you see. And I'm assigned to this Army camp, and they make me cadre. I've got a patch, and that means now I'm issued my ping pong paddle. I can play ping pong. So I'm a left-handed ping pong player. And so I'm working, by the way, this gives you a fantastic advantage over ordinary ping pong players. And it gives you the illusion that you're a good ping pong player. And so I'm playing, and I began to develop into the best ping pong player. You're looking, right now, seriously, you're looking at the best ping pong player that Company K of the 803rd ever turned out. Absolutely fantastic. Backhand, forehand, I had it down pat. And the one guy I played with, you see, all ping pong players have a favorite adversary. Well, Gasser was my adversary. Gasser was 6'9". He was from California, and he was a right-handed ping pong player. Well, you see, it's like a giraffe fighting a mouse. And I could beat Gasser. It was nip and tuck, but it was always 21-18. Gasser, ooh, walk around, that snotty little thing, the little tip over the net. I'd hang him in the corners all over. That great sense of power you get when it's going away, and you go thing, and it goes shoo, boing. And then there's, all right, let's go. Who's serve? And you stand back there and move and see. I'm getting better and better and better as I played. 1 solid year in the day room. I went from T5 to staff. In the day room playing ping pong, and I got better and better and better until finally there was no competition, just me and Gasser. And we put on these demonstrations, how long can we volley? And so we would volley through an entire basic training cycle, like this, this kind of thing. Watch this, Gasser, zing, ding, ding, Gasser, ding. We're playing, and the people would come and watch us. We're fantastic. Well, finally the day came when Gasser and I were shipped. And we've got our bags packed. I've got my paddle stuck down there with my mess kit. Got a set of extra balls, I'm a real, because you never know where you're going to get shipped. There might be real hell there, you never know, So I've got my equipment, and we get shipped up to Fort Monmouth. Well, now we didn't realize that we were in the world of the real city slicker. And by now, Gasser and I figure we've got the whole scene pegged. We've been in the Army a couple of years, we're real solid types, real GIs. And the third week we're here, we get our first weekend pass. Well, I had never seen New York. Gasser had never seen anything bigger than Whittier, California. Do you know, any of you, because you're all Easterners, do any of you know, I'll bet you never will know the thrill that is only a thrill that will be felt by somebody who comes from way out there in the darkness, on the other side of the Hackensack River, out there past the last Howard Johnson on the turnpike, to whom New York has only been a myth. It's like Oz or the Emerald City. Well, here I am for the first time in my life in New York, and I'll never forget the sight. I could not believe a city could look like this. Incredible. It's intoxicating. Scary. It's unbelievably beautiful. And Gasser and I are walking along 23rd Street marveling. We haven't even seen the city yet. It's 23rd Street that's knocking us out, you know. And we finally get uptown, and we go through Times Square, and there it is. You can't believe it. The buildings, everything stretching, the Empire State Building all the way to the sky. And we're drifting around. We've got about, we had at least 2 months' pay in our pockets. Big, fat wallets. That's a great thing about being in the Army, too, you know. Money is for one thing, to squirt. You don't think of tomorrow. Let me tell you, you got this big fat wallet, you got it, you got a pass, a 3-day pass. You're absolutely anonymous. You feel like you're 1,000 feet tall. Well, Gasser and I are walking up and down Times Square. We stop at the Stage Door Canteen. Do you remember that one? Well, we go down to the Stage Door Canteen. They give us a sandwich. We'd seen the movie about this, and we felt like we were intruders. We went down there, and they give us a little sandwich and a hot dog. And even to this day, when I walk past that street, do you know that in the 40s, right off of Broadway, there's a plaque on the side of a building, and it says, in this building was historic Stage Door Canteen during World War II. Well, one of the very few times I ever felt like I was really in the Army, the kind of Army you see in the movies with Van Johnson and all that, was the night that I sat down in the Stage Door Canteen. And this little guy is serving. They had civilian volunteers from the theater would serve. And that night, this guy comes up to me, and he sits down. He's going to be good to the GI. And I said, hi. He says, do you like the Army? I said, What do you say to a 4F, He says, do you like the Army? I says, I've been in the Army long enough now, you don't even say you don't like it or you like it, it's just your life, Do you like your life, friends? So I'm sitting there, and I said, well, what do you do? And he says, oh, I'm an actor. I says, an actor? In Hammond, Indiana, they don't see actors, I thought, oh, here's a phonus balonus. He says, I'm an actor. He's about this high. He says, I'm an actor. I says, what do you do? Where do you act? He says, well, I make movies. I says, you make movies? Well, immediately this means real acting to Hammond, I says, movies? What? Immediately I'm thinking of Johnny Weissmuller pictures and Priscilla Lane. And he says, well, I just finished a movie called Laura. I never heard of it. It was a new movie. I never heard of it. It's a movie called Laura. I never heard of it. I think I'm putting him down, see. He says, well, I don't know whether it's going to do anything. It's just a pot boiler. It's kind of a mystery. I said, Laura, what's your name? He says, Dana Andrews. I said, oh, come on. I never heard of you. And we're sitting there, and that was the kind of evening it was. Back and forth, a kind of strange unreality, and Gasser sitting across the room talking to the singing lady. Believe it or not, he got hooked with the singing lady who was entertaining him. And so, 5 minutes later, we're back out on the street. Here it is now. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. 2 GIs in town, the first time in New York. And we are up on Broadway in the early 50s. Can you imagine that area there now? There's a lot of car dealers there in that area there. And above those car dealers, they had bowling alleys. One after the other were bowling alleys. And Gasser looks up and he says, "You want to bowl?" I said, I want to bowl. All night long they bowled in those days, it was a swing shift and stuff. And one of the windows had a sign that said, "Table tennis." Little did we realize we were about to meet our fate. We were about to be shucked. Gasser says, "Let's go up and give him a lesson." So I says, "Okay, Gasser." And so up those long, winding, dark stairways we go, and there's millions of pool tables. And there's about 25 bowling alleys, and over in the corner there are 3 ping pong tables. And they were beautiful tables. Magnificent tables, not like the day room, with the lumps all over it. So Gasser and I walk over, and a couple of kids are just sort of playing casually, just pinging back and forth. There were 2 empty tables. And Gasser calls the pin boy or whatever he was over and says, "How about a couple of paddles here?" The guy says, "Well, it's 25 cents a game." Gasser says, "That's nothing." He takes out his wallet, punts a $5 bill. He says, "Let's go." "All right, Shep." He says, what do you want? Do you want the light side of the table or the dark side?" We flip. A couple of old ace ping pong players, so we get in a position. I get the ball. It's a real New York City ball, the real big time. So bing. I start to the serve. Bing. And immediately, we're hitting them with authority. That solid authority of feeling free, no scare, no worry. You're on top of your game. Bing! The beautiful lights. Boom! Bing! And immediately these 2 kids look over, One of them says, "Wow, you guys sure can play." Gasser says, "Oh, it's nothing. Watch this." Gasser with the right hand, something, dong, Shepherd goes, ding, doing. We're banging, like back and forth, and we play a game. Shepherd wins 21-18. Gasser says, "Okay, I serve. Let's go." By this time, there's about 10 guys standing around watching. Gasser and Shepherd are playing a Minnesota Fats type game. We're really playing it big. And outside, you can hear the traffic of Broadway. It's the big town. It's everything. We're all, there's a kind of delirium that enters into it. And one of the kids keeps watching. And finally, after about 5 brilliantly fought games, the kid says, "Can I play one of you guys?" Gasser, 6'9", says, "All right. Which one do you want to play?" He says, "All right, I'll take that one. Me." Shepherd. So Shepherd says, "All right, okay, kid." He says, of course, by this time, remember, I'm a GI. I'm bronzed. I got a flat gut. I got stripes all over, my sleeves are rolled up and I'm sweating. I'm really full of it all, So I says, "Okay, you go ahead and serve, kid." So he goes, bing, boing, bing. She's the worst player I've played since the guy in the day room who was OD, bing. So Shepherd boing like this. "All right, go ahead. I'll tell you what, I'll give you a 5 handicap. Okay, kid?" He says, "Thanks." So we play. Shepherd murders him. And so then we play another game. Shepherd murders him even worse. And then he says, "Can I play the tall guy?" And Gasser says, "All right, sure. I'll give you a 5 handicap." So Gasser beats him twice. And then the other kid says, "Can I play?" He is even skinnier and littler. Gasser says, "All right, I'll take you on, kid." And Gasser beats him. By this time, I could see guys drifting away from the bowling alley. They're getting closer, closer, closer. And then that little snot says, "How about putting a buck on the game?" Oh, this is silly, All right, so we put the buck out there. Gasser wins the kid's buck. So then he says, "Let me play the other guy." So I win a buck from him. I win $3 from him. Gasser wins $6 from him. And finally the kid says, "Gee, you guys sure can play." We had him pegged for a rotten rich kid. You know what a rotten rich kid is? The Princeton type. So the kid says, "Listen." He's gasping. He says, "Listen, I'm a good ping pong player. I don't know what you guys are doing to the ball, but I can beat you. And Gasser says, oh, yeah? The kid says, yeah. You want to bet everything in your pocket against everything in my pocket? Gasser says, yeah. And the other kid says, oh, yeah, wise guys, you're doing something to the ball. I'll bet everything in my pocket that he can beat you. So I says, oh, yeah? Gasser and I got it all out there, you know, and we're laying it out, everything, my pass, the whole bit, you know. I says, all right, wise guy, which one do you want to take? The kid says, you. All right. Okay, Gasser. Gasser steps off. Shepherd goes, ding, my best serve, my back forehand slice. Ding, dong, boing. And the kid goes, let me tell you, there was a silence in that bowling alley you could have cut with a knife. Jaime's got another one on the hook. Well, let me tell you, I figured, you know, it's one of them flukes. I got another serve, so Shepherd goes, doing, bang, and I get it in the mouth. That came back, tongue in the face like that. I says, Gasser, give me your paddle. He gives me his paddle. Well, it was a nightmare. That guy took me apart and put me together again with ribbons. He took me apart again and then put me together again with airplane glue. Then he shredded me sideways. Then he put mayonnaise on top of me. Salt and pepper. And I'm laying there, you know, every time I couldn't even touch it. The first time in my life I couldn't. I figured they put holes in the paddles or something. Can't even touch them. It's going ding, ding. And when he served, oh, I don't know whether any of you have ever played a really good ping pong player. I am standing there waiting, you know, and I keep edging back. And Gasser says, play him deep. Play him deep. Play him deep. And I'm about 30 feet back at the table, and this guy lays one right in the strike zone, and it stops. It goes, boom. He says, love 10. All right, hit him. So you want me to hit one? Boom, and a shunk, bang, my paddle goes off. I got nothing but the handle in my hand. Well, it was like that all the way through. I scored 1 point. The game finally ended 21-1. These two kids grabbed the money and disappeared into the crowd. And there we stood. Gasser and I shorn. Our bones shining through. You know, you want to say something like, well, fellas, it's the service. We're in the Army, you know. And about 6 guys with short cigars go back to their pool game, you know. No more interest in us. Our wallets are flat. And the two of us go back down those stairways and out into Broadway. We're walking towards the Y. Thank God we had paid for a room at the Y, 40 cents. We're walking all the way to 23rd Street in the Y, and we're walking through Times Square. Not a word is said until we get down to about 34th Street. And Gasser says, this is sure a big town. It sure is, Gasser. We now approach 23rd Street, and Gasser finally says it. He says, listen, if you don't say anything about it back in the company, I won't either. I say, shake, Gasser. And we both shook hands at the corner of 7th Avenue and 23rd Street. Never to mention it in the company. And 2 days later, we're back in the Company K day room out at Monmouth, killing all the corporals. Bigger than we'd ever been before because we had learned humility. We had learned that there is more to it than meets the eye. And I want to say one little postscript to the scene. I was out of the Army. It was about, it must have been 8 or 9 years later when I got a long-distance call. Now, I rarely get long-distance calls from California. And there's a long-distance call, and I pick it up, and the operator says, is this Mr. Shepherd? And I said, yes. She says, this Corporal Shepherd? Corporal Shepherd? Are they calling me back or what, you know? That's that sick feeling, you know, you get your gut, you know, this is a CO, what are you doing in Hammond, you know? I said, yes. And then I hear this voice. Hey, Shep, it's Gasser. I say, Gasser, for crying out loud, what are you doing? He says, nothing, what are you doing? I said, nothing, what are you doing? He says, nothing, what are you doing? It's two old buddies meeting, see? And then there was a brief pause in the cycle, and he says, do you remember that ping pong game in New York? I say, yeah, Gasser. He says, you haven't said anything about it to anybody, have you? I said, no, why? He says, I'm California champ. I said, Gasser, I know where there's a guy on Broadway that can take you apart. He says, don't mention it. Well, I want to tell you, it was not more than about, 5 years ago that I saw Gasser's picture in Sports Illustrated. And I keep remembering down there, you know, I walk around this town, and I go past those buildings on Broadway where the bowling alley is still swinging. And I get this feeling, it comes just occasionally. I wonder if Jaime is still up there. Dressed in his cardigan, his chinos, you know, standing there waiting for a GI to come in with a great backhand. And so I suppose each one of us in our life have little buildings with plaques on them. Here I learned, keep your mouth shut. Here I learned, can you imagine your life spread out before you and all the buildings and the places where you learned real lessons? Here I learned, never give your right name. Here I learned that there's always somebody with a better backhand than you've got. You know, I have a feeling that in life, there are millions of people who are not sung, who never achieve fame, who have fantastic talent above those who have. Somewhere there's a guy working in a garage that can hit a ball longer, further, and more consistently than Mickey Mantle.
From December 15, 1964, there is something afoot. Shep says that according to a mjor New York City newspaper, there is a super race that operate flying saucers and live at the North Pole.
Have you ever wondered about in a lampant position of readiness about to leap in any direction? Those of us who feel that hanging over us at all times there is a sullen avalanche of discontent about to loose itself from the mountain of desire to come crashing down around our ears, are those of us. For those of us, there are times and there are places. There are things too unimaginable to imagine, just laying out there in the blackness somewhere. Right, gang? No wonder Poe wrote the way Poe wrote. He knew. Well, he didn't know. He guessed. He didn't really guess. He suspicioned. That's better. Baudelaire. He too guessed. I suppose you might say he poesied, but he nonetheless had suspicions. Dark and evil, twisting like the flowers of death. Lit by the gray neon signs of a future generation. Oh, yes, indeed. That's my baby. Oh, that's it. What the hell is this over here? All right, cut it down now. All set now? The other day. Now, remember, this is the 20th century, right, gang? Gee, I keep forgetting. What century is this? It's the 20th century, that's right. What year is it? What'd you say? Oh, yes, that's familiar. It's the 20th century. We're right in the middle of it. Man is tearing away the curtains of doubt, right? He's battering down the bulwarks of ignorance, right? And yet, underneath it all, he suspects there is something afoot. There is something lurking out there in the haystack that cannot quite be explained. Listen to this one now, for example. This is an advertisement from a top New York City newspaper. Name available upon request. It's a top New York City newspaper. All set? Bring it on. Sneak it in there. In a big dynamic heading it says, Revealed. The underground world of supermen discovered by Admiral Byrd under the North Pole and kept secret by the U.S. government. A noted scholar and author of The Hollow Earth says that the true home of the flying saucers is a huge underground world whose entrance is at the North Pole opening. In the hollow interior of the Earth lives a super race which wants nothing to do with man on the surface. They launched their flying saucers only after man threatened the world with A-bombs. Admiral Byrd, says this scholar, led a Navy team into the polar opening and came upon this underground region. It's free of ice and snow, has mountains covered with forests, lakes, rivers, vegetation, and strange animals. But the news of the discovery was suppressed by the U.S. government in order to prevent other nations from exploring the inner world and claiming it. The rotten government will do it again. And now, Dr. Bernard leads you through this subterranean world to meet the civilization which occupies an underground area larger than North America. Beneath the 800-mile crust of the Earth is the greatest discovery in human history, inhabited by millions of super-intelligent beings. If you are ready for information that not many people can handle, order this book today. Gift wrap. Satisfaction guaranteed. I must be delighted. Now. That's it. Hold it there. That's it now. Now that myth, that's a fascinating thing that to persist into our time, our day and age. And that myth has dogged people since the very beginnings of time. That myth. And of course, it's always coupled with the government is keeping it away from you myth. There are two parallel myths. Have you noticed that almost every flying saucer nut winds up by saying, yeah, well, you don't think for 1 minute that the government wants that out, do you? Listen, boy, they know all about it. But let me tell you this, they're not going to let you know anything about it, but don't think they don't know. Oh, boy. Listen, they're suppressing it. That's what they're doing. The reason they're suppressing, well, I'll tell you why. They're afraid the people will panic. And the minute, of course, here he is. He's panicked. His eyeballs are spinning in two different directions. He's sweating. And this is the myth that has persisted since the very beginnings of time. Do you know that in the early days of religions, the very earliest days of religions, various types of religion, not necessarily our types of religion, but very earliest days of religion, that the myth would persist that the government was suppressing it. The best way you can spread any kind of an idea that has to do with fear, the supernatural, is to whisper out of the side of your mouth, listen, buddy. Listen. Are you aware that at this very minute the government is spending $1 million a week trying to keep this stuff away from the people? Are you aware of that? Listen, I got documents that prove that the government has spent over $200 million in the last year and a half simply trying to keep flying saucers out of the news. And why? Why? Do I have to tell you why? Well, within 10 minutes you got a convert. Because everybody secretly suspects the government is after him anyway. And the government somehow exists in people's minds as separate from them. It is a separate race of people called the government. The government. And so that has made many a myth efficacious. It's made many a myth begin to build into a peculiar kind of phantasmagorical reality for many people. Oh, sure. If you're going to sell gold bricks, if you're going to send some kind of a medical flim flam to the people, it doesn't make any difference what it is. If you're going to sell them on the idea that if they ate enough caraway seeds, they'd grow 7 feet tall. And you come around, people all want to believe. It's a belief in magic is what it really is, you see. A secret belief that there are panaceas. A secret belief that there is somewhere, someplace, a magic wand. That there is someplace a device that turns lead into gold. Somewhere there is a discovery that will let you live forever. And if you want to sell somebody on the idea of living forever, listen. Dr. Watanabe worked on this discovery for over 40 years. And you know why you never heard about him? Listen, let me tell you this. Every government in the world has been against him. Every government, they're suppressing it. Why? Well, if a guy lives forever, for crying out loud, what's this going to do to the guys that make cough drops? What's this going to do to the guys that make caskets?
From December 15, 1964, there is something afoot. Shep says that according to a mjor New York City newspaper, there is a super race that operate flying saucers and live at the North Pole.
Turnpikes in Europe like we have, you know. Got little winding roads that go up and down in the Alps. That's why they have these little cars that hardly go, 15, 20 miles an hour. That little... Oh, we live in a turnpike world here in America, believe me. And right out there at this very minute, right now, there are probably 7 million guys listening to the radio. 710 on a dial. And they're playing turnpike tag, which is the American bullfight. Oh, yeah, and that Grand Prix is sitting down there with the wide track. And old Howard is here behind his jeweled steering wheel on his Florentine plastic upholstery, stain-proof. And over here is little Esther Jane, and she's dreaming that if she could get to the village. And she keeps looking over at poor old Howard. Howard, the ex-basketball star from Muncie Tech. Howard, who keeps every Saturday saying, why don't we go to the hockey game? And she says, no. Why don't they have ballet here? Why can't I go where Sophia Loren goes on Saturday night? She doesn't go to the hockey game. Sophia Loren doesn't go to Howard Johnson. And here I am. And she's sitting there with her little dream, her little nimbus of fantasy around her. And Howard is sitting here. Why do I have to go to Howard Johnson's? Sardi's. That's where the playboys go. These little, what do they call them? He doesn't quite know how to say it, see? He's read about it. It's those italicized words that you always run across in Hemingway, you know? He says that little Boyd. That little intimi Boyd. That's where he wants to go, and instead he's going to the Red Rooster hamburger joint. And he's driving and driving and driving, and then he could see coming up from behind him those yellow, green, red, blue, and orange lights of a big semi-tractor trailer. That's the most exciting moment on the turnpike, right, gang? And you could just see him coming up, you know. You could feel the ground. You could feel that reverberating diesel engine, and that great big Cummins motor is booming it out. And you're sitting there, see, and you watch him come up. Yellow, green, red lights coming up there, and it's exciting. It's kind of like approaching Armageddon. He's coming up closer and closer. And then you see those big letters, you know, that hang on the side there. It says, Hemingway. Hemingway, what a great name for a truck. Have you seen those names? Hemingway, it says. And he's sitting there in his car, and then, boom, he goes past. And you feel that rocking. You know that in the wake? And then Howard pulls in his gut muscles. He says, watch this, baby. And the chick is somewhere off on the French Riviera with Razzano Brazzi. Somewhere she is playing in a movie directed by Jules Dassin. Yes, somewhere she is playing a mandolin. And outside of her little Greek peasant hut is a fisherman played by Tony Perkins. What a great fisherman, Perkins, you know. I'm afraid when Perkins gets in a boat, it rows him. And so here they go, you see, and on comes Saturday night. And they're both sitting in the car. You got the scene? And as long as nothing comes in from the outside, they could keep the fantasy going. Do you realize how happy Indianapolis would be if there was no New York? Really, seriously, think about this. Think of how the rest of the world, why do you think the rest of the world is mad at the United States? You think it's because of our foreign policy? Oh, really? Do you? Do you think it's because we're rotten? Oh, no, I'm sorry, I've traveled too much and lived a little too much. It's because, and I submit to you, America itself is the New York of the world. It would be easier to live in a little peasant village in Crete if there was no New York, if there was no United States, where somewhere, somehow, people live forever in these evening dresses. Right, gang? Look at us here. Yep, and forever turn out French rarebits made of esoteric cheddar cheeses. Drink ancient wines and live in a kind of orange four-color world of Vogue magazine. Yes, right. Hear her back there? Well, now these things all come to roost on Christmas. We're here now, and it's the night after Christmas. And I'm going to warn you that I am perfectly aware, gang, here in the Limelight, that this is one of the most dangerous nights of the year. Are you aware that police records show that the night after Christmas, just like the night after New Year's, is the night it all happens? Oh, man, those cops are sitting in their cars tonight waiting for that call. And it comes constantly. Out there in the darkness, they're fist-fighting their way through this night after Christmas. And why? Well, we all vaguely feel let down. We've been building up to this thing, you know, like for all year they say there's 100 days to Christmas. There are 30 days to Christmas. There are 19 days to Christmas. 15 days. You walk around, you get the sweat going inside you, you know, this year it's going to work. This year it's going to be Christmas joy untrammeled. This year, peace to the earth, goodwill to men. Oh, boy, yes. You get this thing going, and you walk through Macy's and Gimbel's, and they've got the stereophonic carillons playing, and the hymns are going out, and the whole scene, you know. And then it says 12 days to Christmas. 12. 10. 9. It's like countdown. 5. 4. And now you're beginning to pace. Even though, no, I don't care how hip you are, how cool you are, there is a thing inside of you. You fight it. You say, it's just for kids. You look back, you see, to make sure no one heard you too loud. 3 days to Christmas. And by now you're hiding little things, you know. You're tying stuff up. You're working on it. 2 days to Christmas. And everybody in the colleges all over the country are let out. This is a big moment, you know. And by the way, it's a very nervous moment. Because as a kid stays in college longer, he hates two things. To get home. Oh, boy, they hate to come home after about the junior year. And then they hate to go back. It's a terrible problem. You know, you're between the devil and the deep blue sea, and over here on one department, You're totally dead, and on the other department, you can't go back home again. So here you are. It's Christmas time. It's nervous time. Mothers sit out there in the Midwest and say, I suppose all he's going to do is phone again. And here you are, plotting on how to get out of phoning. You know? Oh, yeah, it's a terrible moment. You know, isn't that awful scene? I'll tell you, there are more. You know that sign when you go into the phone booths and it says, call home for Christmas. That's a scary sign. I would like to know how many fantastic, unbelievable family scenes have been played out over that friendly, long-distance phone wire. Somebody took... That's my mother! Tell her I haven't got a job yet! None of her business! Oh, man. Production all the way, friends. Well, I'll tell you, no, it's a funny business, this telephone call. In fact, I visited a friend of mine this afternoon, and there's this glumness. You know when you walk into the living room and the wreaths are hanging here, the Christmas tree is drooping a little bit, you know, and you see a couple of terrible-looking ties laying under the tree there, everybody's sort of sitting around, and you have this sense that something has happened. Nobody's saying anything. And so I sit down with this group. There's, you know, man, woman, one kid. The other two have cut out already. And I'm sitting there, and they bring out the fruitcake and a sherry. That's a great combination. And I'm sitting there drinking the sherry, and gradually it began to develop. She said to him, she says, look, I told you not to call. Right. And he says, but she wants me to call every year. I said, well, what is it? Come on, tell me. And she said, oh, he just talked to his mother. I said, but what happened? She said, I don't know. I did. There's that awful feeling. Now, I think maybe this is more a male thing than a female thing. You dial, and you got this excitement going in you. You know, I'm going to talk to home. And you're usually in some rotten little booth on 46th Street. There's a bum staggering around out there, you know. Have you ever really looked at the floor of one of those phone booths? You realize there's a lot more goes on in those things than just telephoning mother, you know. And you wonder how they get away with it with all the glass. And you never see it yourself, you know. You're standing in there, you're looking on this stuff, and you walk like that. There's this fantastic smell in the phone booth. And you look up, and there's this little sign which says, call home, and it shows that mother they always show, you know, with the big white teeth. Have you noticed that mothers in ads always look like a 19-year-old lady wearing a white wig? Have you noticed that? She's looking out, you know, and she's got the phone that says, hi, Sonny. And you start out with that wonderful feeling of hope that it's going to be different. And you look up, and somebody has written something next to mother. You know? Look at all the embarrassed guys. I'll tell you, you can tell the readers from the writers here. You know, you look up there, these are really male experiences. You look up there and you say, oh, boy. And you wonder the number of little old ladies wearing lace collars and little purple dresses and carrying brocaded handbags that have called from this booth and have looked up at, you know, that's another male thing. I suppose I shouldn't talk about it on Christmas, but that's another male thing. Men, have you ever been with this beautiful chick who looks like she's made out of Dresden china, you know, just a magnificent chick? And you've been trying to impress her for weeks, and finally you're taking her out to go to some very expensive joint on the east side. You're all dressed up and you work with your little collars and the whole thing. How many times do you try 3 shirts on before you get the one that shows your magnificent jaw off right? This is something women don't know about men. So what's the matter with his collar? Somehow, man, that's another male thing. Have you had the days, men, when you look in the mirror and you just, for some reason or other, look rotten? You're rotten look today, Yesterday you were great. Today you're rotten, and all kinds of little things, the little footballs hanging all over you, and your shave is kind of cruddy, and everything in your neck is flat. That is the one day of truth in your life, friends. Look carefully. Dorian Gray, this is the moment. Well, this is one of the worst things that a male has to face. This is a real male thing. You've got this chick. She's beautiful. Chiseled profile. She's delicate. You know that kind of female that is kind of a rare violin. And you are preparing to play a sonata. That sort of thing. And you've been working up to this moment, and you go over to her place, you pick her up, and the next thing you know, you are walking down a long corridor in the subway. And those unseen friends have been there before you. What is your technique of walking past one of those signs, man? It's written all over the wall, Some guy's written all over the Levy, that Levy bread thing? The one that says you don't have to be Jewish to enjoy Levy's. Some guy with red crayon, blah, 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 he's written all... Whew, and you can't ignore it, so you walk along like this. You say, hey, look at those bricks. Aren't those interesting bricks? Hey, you're walking along. And then there's another one on the wine thing, the Gallo wine. You walk, and gradually there's this faint sense of embarrassment. Men feel responsible for that, women. Are you aware that the male who's with you feels that somehow he did it? Because it's floating around in his mind, And somebody beat him to it. And he's embarrassed. I don't know what women think of this. I've wondered how women feel about this thing. And there you are in the phone booth with all of those things going through your mind. Somebody has said a very interesting Freudian thing about mother. And such a nice lady. And you're standing there and you're dialing Hammond, Indiana. You dial, it says area code 319. You have all those numbers, It's very official now. You don't even argue with operators. They never even say, there is a Mr. Shepherd on the phone. Will you accept it? That moment of truth. Can you imagine calling mother and she says, no! Oh! That's why they did away with operators, friends. Yep, the phone company thinks. Either that or one of the executives had a mother. And so you dial and you wait, and that first moment, that exciting moment of trepidation, there's a kind of sick feeling in you. And yet there's excitement. That sound of, oh, oh, oh. And there's that thing that says, I hope they're not home. I can always say, I called. Oh. I'll give it 2 more rings. Oh. And then there's a click. There's a moment, you say, hi. Another moment, and you hear that voice floating over 10,000 miles. Who is this? You say, me, Ma, me. She says, who? Well, it's me. Merry Christmas, Ma. And she says, oh, Merry Christmas. You have not written in 8 months. Remember that, friends. There is where the guilt comes in. And not only have you not written in 8 months, you haven't even thought of home in 8 months. And when you did think of it, it was with that vague irritation. That vague irritation, it's still out there. You know, that feeling that there's that little pimple that's still growing on you. It's still there. And so you get that call through, and then finally there is that moment of, you both agreed now. It's Christmas. Let's forget about all that stuff. Let's forget about the fact you haven't called, you haven't written. She hasn't written, she hasn't called. And how are you? Very good, how are you? Then there's that brief pause. She says, okay, I guess. I said, what do you mean, Ma? How are you? She says, I'm fine. I said, well, Merry Christmas, Ma. How's everything out there? Another brief pause. And the pause says, as if you give a damn. That's what that pause means. She says, things are, come see, come saw. Go along. Is it snowing, Ma? She says, no. Then she says, is it snowing there? You say, no. And a drunk wanders past. This is the merry electronic AT&T Christmas call of the year. And tonight we are saluting all the guys who have made that call. All the people who are saying to themselves, it's going to be better this year. I'm going to go straight. I'm going to straighten it all up. Oh yes, Christmas time is a time of great trauma. And you know, I told a story. It's a funny thing. I saw my mother here about 6 months ago. And we talked about this very story. And to this day, she does not know exactly what happens. Each one of us, and I'll guarantee you right here at these tables, there are kids who have fantastic stories, things that have happened to them, that their mother and father have no idea about. None whatsoever. Yeah, I'll bet. Yeah. What are you applauding? Great Scott. You know, everybody is applauding what happened, not my kid. I know all about little Johnny. And this little kid is sitting there, his two eyes are going sideways. That immediate feeling, oh boy, if he ever knew. Ooh, wow. Well, you know, we all grow up with these stories inside of us because there are some stories we just can't tell. Just impossible to tell. And I'm going to tell you one tonight. You can tell it to other people. Do you know that every last chick in this room can tell her analyst things she would never tell her mother or father in a million years? No, I'm serious. That's why, have you seen those question and answer columns in the magazines that say things like, my daughter has been seeing a guy who runs a garage in our neighborhood. Now what should I... They talk to Ann Landers like they would never talk to their husband. Have you seen those columns? They're growing, boy, I'll tell you. One of the greatest ones I ever saw is one that was in Look magazine a few years ago. Got my first insight into that, you might say, journalistic confessional box. It was just beginning to grow, and I submit to you that within 3 years, our life is getting so abstract. We're so removed from each other. It's so automated. You are going to see stuff in those columns you wouldn't believe. Yeah, it's true. It's really going to start coming out. In fact, the other day I saw one that said, Dear Ann Landers, it was a little girl. She said, I am in a very difficult situation, Ann. And what should I do about it? Signed, worried. I'll bet. And Ann Landers, with the typical aplomb of the journalistic answer, says, talk it out with your mother. Says, whenever you have problems like this, talk it out with your... Have you ever tried to talk out any of those problems with your mother? Dear Ma, well, you remember the other night after the football game, Ma? And I got home an hour and a half late? You just don't talk those things out. You may scream them out. You don't talk them out. And so I am sitting in a dentist's office. One of the very first times I ever saw this scene develop. I'm sitting in a dentist's office. And it's a couple years back. And every last one of us are reduced to basic men in the dentist's office. Yeah, there's the gutty guy, that sits over there. You can see him all the time. He walks in, he says, yeah, okay, yeah. 11 o'clock, oh yeah, 5 minutes early. He says loudly to let everybody know he's got guts. 5 minutes early, yeah, okay. Then there's the other guy that walks in hoping that they've canceled him. That the doctor has a difficult emergency case. Hey, isn't that a great feeling when you go in and they say the doctor's sick today? You say, gee whiz, I was looking forward to it, You go out with that sweat. Well, I am sitting in a dentist's office over here on 57th Street, right in the heart of the high-rent district. Where dentistry is painful in many ways. A little added soupçon there of pain. And I'm waiting in this waiting room, and you know how dentist waiting rooms are deliberately designed to go against what you're about to go through? The little Currier and Ives prints, Grandma Moses, and here are the old National Geographics, and the walls are light pink. Wouldn't it be great if a dentist really came out and said it? And he had these Hieronymus Bosch paintings on the wall. People tormented and screaming in pain. There's an old woodcut of a guy on the rack. And I submit that it would make you feel better. You'd come in and say, well, I'm not the only one, and sit down. But instead, all the people are living such great lives. They're in little sleighs, and they're in little red barns, and they're eating maple syrup and all that. And you're sitting there, and this thing is going, Goom, goom, goom. And I think one of the reasons that toothaches bother us is that we are all suddenly aware of imminent decay. It is like the creeping pain. Somehow you're rotting to pieces, and you know it. You're sitting there and it's throbbing away. And yeah, you can feel it, can't you? And you're trying to pretend it isn't hurting as much. And that it's beginning to go away. So that when he asks you, does it hurt? You say, well, no, it's not very bad, actually. Ooh, and you got 8 eyes going around your face. This sweat, ooh, it's been since 2 o'clock last morning. It's a pain that starts 1.5 feet above your head and goes all the way down into the ground with roots. Big, bicuspid, yellow roots. And it just gets gunk, 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 gunk. And you're dressed in your $55 sport coat, your button-down collars. You got your $2 boxer shorts on, You got your silk socks, and all the while it's going gunk, gunk. And you taste a funny, metallic, bloody, sort of strange taste. It's your guts. They're coming out through this thing, Next thing you know, your stomach is... You feel it, see? And all the while above you, Grandma Moses. The old life. Well, they didn't have toothaches. They didn't have any of these pains, and I'm up there on 57th Street. See? And sitting over here is that beautiful girl that they always have now in doctors' offices with the pink phones, the little yellow phones, and the crisp white uniform. And off somewhere in the distance, you can hear the faint sound of Muzak playing beautiful, soft, escapist string music. Somewhere over the rainbow, up on high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. It's floating around you. And then you hear, faint, attenuated by distance, a thin groan. It's another decayer in there. And you try to pretend, no, it's not happening. Yay! And you sit there and you look at your geographics. You try to get involved in the rainfall of the Andes. And there's all those chicks, and it still isn't doing it. Boom, 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 and that fist is hitting you from inside. And she keeps saying, the doctor will be with you in just a minute. You hear that scream in there? And you know somewhere there is a soul in abject torment. And that dentist is in there trying to pack him full of stuff. He's fighting decay. He's trying to keep this poor son of a gun going for another 10 minutes. Keep him from falling apart. He's wiring them together, and he's putting little solder in there, and he's got little braces and bits and stuff. And this guy, and you hear it in there, see. Well, I am sitting there one day when one of the great moments of insight came to me. There is a copy of Look magazine. Well, now, Look magazine has a page in it. I'm going through it, you know, and there's just chicks and stuff. And suddenly there's this page, a big, beautiful page of questions and answers. How did I know I was going to find the answer? There, staring out from the page, is this round, confident face, big, rimless glasses, great big grin, and above it says, "Ask Dr. Norman Vincent Peale." He's looking out at me. It is America's greatest humor writer. The greatest humorist America's produced. And there he is, he's looking out, and he answers these questions for millions of Look readers all over. By the way, isn't that a great name for a magazine? Look. Look. We've got magazines called Look, Peek. When we need something like insight, we get Look. And there's the first question. And this taught me a lesson I've never forgotten. It said, "Dear Dr. Peale, dear Dr. Peale, I'm working in this office in the International Bolton Rivet Company. I love my work, Dr. Peale. Every week I get the reports in on time. I work hard. I've been here 15 years, Dr. Peale. But Mr. Bullard, my boss, blames everything on me. Every 10 minutes the door opens and he comes roaring out and he says, 'Craven, what did you do now?' But Dr. Peale, I didn't do nothing. What can I do, Dr. Peale? Please. I love my job. Signed, Craven." Well, I'm reading this, you know, and I can hear off in the distance the sound of that drill going. And I can hear those faint, and there's Grandma Moses looking down on me. And Dr. Peale is standing there confident, big rimless glasses. And his answer, "Craven, please stand up, Craven. Get up off your knees. Craven, that's a very difficult problem. But we understand it, Craven. Yes, that sort of thing happens around here all the time." And it hit me. It happens to Dr. Peale. I said, "What do you mean, Dr. Peale?" And all of a sudden I get this image of Dr. Peale sitting in his study with the light coming down through those stained glass windows, you know. He's turning out an LP, or he's writing an article, you know, or getting out a book, and all of a sudden the door slams open, and there's this giant bearded figure. "Peale! Peale, what did you do now?" It's the boss. Well, you know, I get these moments. Speaking of the boss, what radio station is this, gang? Come on, build it out. That's right, let's go. Let's bring out some guts here, gang. Why, we're down here. Where are we, friends? The Limelight in the heart of festering Greenwich Village, where truth flows like a great river down to the sea, and where sensitivity, right, gang, blossoms like a mulberry bush in a vast oasis of beauty. Right, gang? Oh, man. You know, isn't it discouraging to realize that 18 million people figure if they get to the village that they'd finally make it? Well, here we are, gang. There ain't no place else to go. I mean, going to Cleveland ain't going to help. Well, I'm telling you, I read this piece, you see, and I say, you know, by George, that is true. No matter where the guy is, no matter who he is, no matter how big he is, there is somebody always yelling at him. And if it isn't somebody really in the next room, there is some little bullard inside of you. How many guys go through life with a little thing sitting right next to their gut somewhere? And about every 15 minutes, especially when things get a little quiet in the office, you know, and the phone stops ringing, or maybe at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're laying flat out on your sack, you're trying to get to sleep, all of a sudden that little voice starts hollering, when are you going to get on a stick? When are you going to quit faking it? When are you going to start really doing something? And you say, what do you mean? Why, what do you mean? Do you realize I am now second agency account executive in charge of the pickle plants? I am in charge of all pickle copy that comes out of my agency. This is no small achievement for a man of 88. And that voice says, oh yeah? You haven't written a pickle ad in 4 years that you can read, you phony. Phony, phony, phony. And then the guy gets up, goes into the John. He looks in the mirror, opens the thing up, and he takes out one of those little Alka-Seltzer tablets. And you know that little Alka-Seltzer man that sings? That little Alka-Seltzer cat that runs back and forth in the Alka-Seltzer ads? He's hoping that that little man will sing madrigals of hope to him. Down it goes, and then all he gets is boop. A big fat burp floats out. All of... yes, dear. Oh, man. You never know what's going to score, I'll tell you. I mean, with the risk of being in bad taste, have you ever sat there quietly in a very official gathering, and all of a sudden you feel something stirring inside of you, see? And you say, well, and they start to talk to you. And somebody says, what's the matter, Fred? And you say, nothing. Then all of a sudden, and you don't recognize the taste. And you wonder what in the world is still stuck down there. You know, you get the feeling that something is still there from when you were 8. There is an old hot dog that you ate once at Comiskey Park in a doubleheader, and it's still stuck in some crevasse down there. And it's beginning to make itself known. That funny feeling. Well, I read this piece, you see. And I say to myself, every last guy has got 18 little voices that are yelling at him. Now, there's 2 different ways to react to this. There is the one guy who never, ever in his life learned to ignore it. And this guy goes through life skulking. And every time he makes a move and tries to stand up, that voice starts saying, phony, phony. He ducks down. He doesn't want anybody else to hear, see? He hides by the water cooler. And that little voice says, you're a phony. You're a phony. You don't love that chick. You don't like your wife. You hate your kids. You're a phonus balonus. When are you going to be honest once in your life? And he goes back and sits at his desk and starts making paperclip sculpture. Yes, but then there's the other guy. Somewhere along the line, the other guys learned to turn away. Pretend that voice wasn't even being heard. They turned down the vast hearing aid of the soul. And they never hear that voice. They walk around. They've learned how to carry cocktails. You know that look? The people who really belong at cocktail parties. Don't you have that feeling of at least 75% of the cocktail parties that you go to that you're not a cocktail party goer? that half of the meetings you go to, the other guys are really involved. They're talking about this big project, you know. Well, we're going to open up the Ohio territory, and we're going to take care of you. Charlie, you take care of the copy. Fred, you handle all the other media. And there you're sitting there and you keep saying, who cares, who cares? Your eyes keep getting shorter and you keep falling asleep. And somewhere you feel the other guys are with it. Well, they ain't any more than you. That's a good thing to know. They have just turned off the gain on that little voice. And they walk through life. You know that beautiful cocktail party stance? You kind of hold a hip like this. You hold it, you sway a little bit, and you rock on the balls of your feet. And you have all the proper names at your fingertips, right on the edge of your tongue. Why, yes, it's like something right out of Kafka. Yes. Kafka. You never read Kafka in your life, you know. Yes, of course, reminds me a little bit of Fellini. You know, just a little touch of the surrealism with an interesting attitude towards sentimentality. You just sort of play it as though not only have you read Kafka, somehow you're just a little above and to the right of Kafka. You see, yes, he's rather interesting. You should see what I've got in me. It'll come out one day. Well, within every last family circle sitting right here, there are at least 5,000 secrets that are being held. I'd love to know what they are. Kids who can tell you stories of untold debauchery. Adults who've got things they have not said and they will not say for the rest of their lives. You know, it's interesting how many kids figure that all the rottenness that came along was discovered in their 13th year. They really do. They really figured that's why every young novelist writes a fantastic novel about sex. He figures it's a new development. You see? He really does. And he understands that nobody before him does. Nobody before him knows the true beauty, the fantastic soul-searching passion of this magnificent new discovery, sex. And all the while, you know, it's going on all around in this fantastic fruitcake of life. You can't, you know, you just can't for the life of you see your mother in the front seat of a convertible after the basketball game at 2 o'clock in the morning with some guy you never even saw. It ain't your father, it's somebody else, you know. You imagine looking at that scene and you see your mother there and there's a tall, skinny guy with pimples and your father is a short, fat guy with pimples. You know? And your mother's got this big scene going on. You know, you want to say, hey, Mom, cut it out. That ain't Dad. No, we don't want to believe that anything like that ever happened. And so for that reason, all the kids, as each one hits 13, he figures that it's all new. And it better be kept that way. Because right at this group here, I can see all these little secrets floating around. Well, on this night, in my 12th year, over 12,000 years ago, a fantastic moment happened to me that is still buried as a secret inside of me. Now, all of us know that when we go through that period of about 12, 13, and 14, there is the illusion, sometimes it even lasts to about 20. There is the illusion of infinite wisdom. And not only that, the illusion of being able to spot a phony a mile away. There is also that illusion that anybody else around you who is older is a fool, an idiot, and a knave. And a bumbling old fathead, you know? You get this feeling, so you go through it. You just do. It's a natural thing. Well, for about 2 months before Christmas. Now, you remember, I'm living out in Indiana, northern Indiana, where we got a lot of territory, you know. There's a lot of vacant lots. There are a lot of forests. There's a swamp there. There's 8 million spatsies. These are sparrows, birds. And the kids lived in close proximity with the spatsies and the snakes, the turtles and the birds and the bums. Everything was all going, see, out there. And one of the big things to have in that neighborhood was a BB gun. Well, about, I'd say, roughly September, I began to lay the groundwork. I began to establish that what I wanted was a BB gun. And I began to show my mother these great BB gun ads, you know. To any of you who don't know what a BB gun is, it's an air rifle. And I used to show her these ads that showed Red Ryder special carbine model with a compass in the stock, you know, signed by the Red Ryder. And they had these beautiful Daisy Model 200s. There was a Benjamin pump gun. Well, I was a Daisy man. I had an idea, you know, like guys, even at the beginning of their career, they begin to have myths and illusions about what brand is the best. There are 9 million guys that think Fords rattle. That's their myth. There are 8 million guys who say Chevys don't hold up. That's their myth. Each guy has a myth. Well, I believe that Benjamin pump guns didn't have power. That was my myth. And I believed that the Red Ryder model was for sissies. The only one that was a good one was a Daisy. A Daisy Model 200 that had 200 copper BBs in it. That's what the 200 stood for. And it was a carbine model, and I kept saying, that's what I want. And beginning in September, my mother kept saying, you'll shoot somebody's eye out. That's a real mother phrase. You'll shoot somebody's eye out. I said, oh, Mom, what do you mean? I know how to handle a BB gun. I shoot Bruners all the time. You'll shoot somebody's eye out. Now, I'm not going to have all the doctor bills and all that. You'll shoot somebody's eye out. Oh, Mom, I'm only going to shoot spatsies. She says, you're going to shoot somebody's eye out, and I'm not going to buy you a BB gun. Well, you know that slow, erosive process that kids learn very early in life. That is the whine. You know, you begin to develop that. I can still whine great. You notice that? One of the few skills that remain from my childhood. You know, crying out loud. Oh, I use it all the time at the station. They call me in the sales department and say, well, you did it again. I say, oh, crying out loud, you guys. Oh, wow. They can't stand the whine. And it was like the Chinese water torture. About every third day, I would just spend the entire day just free-form whining. You know, that high pitch through the nose. And she'd say, why don't you go out and do something? Get out of the way. You're underfoot all the time. I would wait 2 beats. 1, 2. She'd say, now get out of here and quit whining. Ooh, you're driving me out of my skull. You're whining. You just got to keep going, you know. You got to keep hitting them. Well, I figured I was beginning to make headway. Because you know that funny little self-satisfied look that people get when they say, oh, boy, are you going to be surprised on Christmas? You know, oh, wow. Well, then, you know, you learn early when to start attenuating the whine. So I'm playing on this whine, you know, like a vast organ. See, pulling the stops. I'd wait. Then I'd say, well, maybe I better make sure. So it's Friday afternoon. I'd say, hey, Ma. She'd say, what? Just reminding her I ain't giving up, you know. Well, every second day she is saying, you're going to shoot somebody's eye out. Boy, if you get a BB gun and you shoot somebody's eye out, you're really going to have trouble. You hear that? Then I knew I was in. I knew I was in. See, I'm pretending I don't know. Oh, Ma, gee whiz, well, I got to have a BB gun, Ma, wow. She said, look, you're going to shoot somebody's eye, and if you're not careful, if you got a BB gun and you're not careful, I'm going to take that away, and your father's going to break it right in half. You know that rotten, snotty look that a kid has? Oh, this old doll doesn't know nothing, you know. What a fool, you know. That constant, you're going to break somebody's eye, you're going to bust it. Well, do I have to tell you, 2 days before Christmas, It's in that beautiful, beautiful winter time that they have out in the Midwest. The snow has been coming down for 3 days. It's getting higher, you know, and in school, you know that excitement you build up in school? Where they're singing all the Christmas carols. And every couple of days we're singing things like Silent Night. Oh, all the while I can see me with that Daisy 200. Shooting somebody's eye out, you know. And I knew who I was going to get right away, you know. Well, we've got this whole thing building up, you see. And that's the excitement. We're cutting out of green paper little Christmas trees. You know that? You remember when you used to cut those out? You had little round pieces of red paper and yellow, and everybody makes a Christmas tree and takes it home, you know, on a piece of manila paper. And you write Randy or Dickie on the bottom, you know. You say, here, Ma, Christmas card, Ma. Hoping, you know, that she'll look at you and say, oh, he should have 3 BB guns, you know, for this beautiful... And they're singing, and they've got the Christmas candy. And finally, the day before Christmas, our school always let out the day before Christmas Eve, like the 23rd. And they have the big party in school. And you know how Christmas parties are in school? They're a very special kind of party. All the kids, half of them are singing in the choir, and the other half they give each other little presents, like kazoos, you know, that kind of stuff. Little fun things, and we've all taken names of people and given them the little gift, and the big thing is heading right at us. And boy, the excitement is growing. It's getting almost like a mushroom cloud, like some great big bomb going off. And now it is Christmas Eve. In our house, the presents were put under the tree on Christmas Eve. And we would be all excited. The tree would be trimmed all afternoon. And finally, people are sneaking in there. And we always went to bed. We had a whole thing in the family, you know, we went to bed. And the next day, we would wake up, and our presents would be there. They wouldn't be there the night before. They'd be there the next morning. And so, 7 a.m. dawns bright and crisp. You could see that snow hanging out there, and I am out of that bed like a shot. Boom, you know, into there. Oh, I'm digging through all the junk, you know, looking. You know, I'm knocking the sleds and stuff aside. My kid brother's already crying, you know. I'm looking. Oh, there it is. And it's all wrapped in red paper with ribbons, and it's unmistakably a rod. And it's heavy. And I can hear those BBs going, you know that sound? I rip it open, and there it is. A beautiful, chromium-plated Model 200 Daisy air rifle. Well, with it came a little package of paper targets. So I immediately rushed back into the bedroom. I'm putting on my high tops, got all the stuff, you know, my sheepskin coat. I got my hat on, you know, with the goggles up here. Boy. And I am out there now. Everybody's asleep in the house. Remember that. My mother's in the bed. My father's in the bed. My kid brother's unwrapping packages. And I am out by the front porch. In those days, I was a glasses wearer. I had been wearing glasses since 9. And I'm out there with my glasses polished. And up there on the steps, I put my target. You know, the steps come down, I got the target. Back through the snow I go, cock the son of a gun. You know that great stance? You take your BB gun like this. I could see that target down there. That bullseye wavering back and forth before my Daisy Model 200 sight. Boom! And it goes boom, bang, crash! My glasses are in Stryker's yard across the street. 8,000 pieces. It has missed my eye by 1/4 millimeter. And I don't know whether any of you glasses wearers know what it's like to break your glasses at the age of 12 or 13. That is a fantastic family problem with my BB gun. Woo! They're gone. I can't find them. I'm staggering around. My gun is over my head. The first shot, I'm telling you. I walk, here they are. There's glass all over the place. I pick them up. They're crooked, they're hanging sideways. Up the steps I go. I take the paper and I wrap it around, put it under there. And there's a scratch on the side of my head, you know, the whole scene. I'm scared out of my wits. Oh, boy. And I put my glasses down there. I'm trying to hide them. My kid brother's walking around. Crunch! I say, Randy, you busted my glasses! Randy, my glasses, man! He busted my glasses! And my mother came out and she says, you broke his glasses! Pow! My kid brother's crying, and I'm sitting there with that fantastic feeling of, that beautiful feeling of total lack of guilt. I say, hey, Ma, can I take my BB gun out and try it, Ma? So within each one of us, friends, there are those little secrets. And 6 months ago, I'm sitting with my mother, and I said, hey, Ma, do you remember when Randy busted my glasses? She says, yes, you know, I still feel sad about yelling at him like that on Christmas morning, but he shouldn't have done it. And my kid brother still looks at me, even to this day, with a funny look. I have not gotten a Christmas card from him since I was 10. So, gang, let's applaud Christmas and hope that next year it'll be better.
Well, that's it for Air Checks this week. We will have more Gene Shepard next week. I can't always tell how long each episode is going to be, but we keep on doing this until we hit the last episode in 1977. Air Checks is normally a 3-hour podcast uploaded weekly and can be heard every Sunday on the K-Tai radio network. See you at the same time and same channel.